This conference will now be recorded.
Golden, good ball.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah, you're good.
It's good? Okay, in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act of the State of New Jersey, adequate notice of this regular meeting was published in the Atlantic City Press, posted on the front door at Township Hall, and provided to the Township Clerk. Will everybody please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
States of America. To the
to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody, for joining me with my very small flag, but it is what it is. That's all we have here. Roll call, Shelley, please.
Ms. Galderisi, not here yet. Mr. Mishura?
Here.
Sorry, guys. Ms. Mitchell? Here. Mr. Pancoast?
Here.
Ms. Petrosa?
Here.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
Here.
Mr. Shaw?
Here.
Mr. Truly?
Here.
Mr. Unsworth?
Here.
Mr. Casaccio?
And here, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Did everybody get a chance to review the minutes from the November 5th, 2020 meeting? And is there any additions or corrections so noted? If not, I'll ask for a motion on the minutes as presented.
I
I'll make that motion.
Minutes.
Matt Unsworth.
Sure.
Second.
Second from Andy Shaw. Call the roll on the minute, Shelley, please.
Mr. Mishura?
Yes.
Ms. Mitchell?
Yes.
Ms. Petrosa?
Yes.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Truly?
Yes.
Mr. Unsworth?
Yes.
Mr. Casaccio?
Abstain, I was not present. Okay. Shelley Lee, do you solemnly swear the testimony that you're about to give before the board tonight is the truth?
Yes.
Paul Dietrich, do you solemnly swear the testimony that you're about to give before the board tonight is the truth?
Yes.
We have Sandy Mursky. Can you?
Well, no,
Please.
he's on it. I think he's for the next application. So Sandy, if you could go ahead and turn your webcam off.
Yeah, right. He's for the hotel.
Correct.
Okay. Everybody, Shelley provided a schedule for the 2021 meeting year. We have to get this approved tonight because she has to get it published so we can have our January meeting. Two items I'm going to bring up. First is the April meeting has been changed to the beginning of April, April 1st, due to the, we'll call it the Easter break that occurs, and usually a lot of people might be away, and who knows what's going to happen with this COVID stuff, who's going to be here and who's not. The other one is the November 4th meeting, because that fell on, what was it, Shelley, Veterans Day?
Yes, Veterans Day.
Yeah, and this Township Hall was closed, and I thank Sherry for picking that up. That's the two changes in dates. The second item is the start time. I would like to try to, unless there's some major reason not, is to start the meetings at 6:30 p.m., at least during the winter months. We can look at it in April when the time changes and we want to go back to 7:30. We can do that also, but at least like to
I
try.
would be amenable to that if the consensus is that way.
Okay, Karen, any yes or no?
It's a great idea.
Okay, and if we get to the summer months where, hey, it's lighter later and, we want to do some stuff at home before we get here, then I don't have a problem going back to 7:30. Andy, any comment?
I'll speak. I think it's a great idea.
I'm
Go
good.
ahead, Andy.
I'm good. I'll get home from work early.
Rich?
I'm good with it.
Good. Matt,
I just think it's past your bedtime, Paul. That's why you're changing it, but it's fine with me.
I think it would be better to get out earlier. Mark, any comments?
No, it's fine for me.
And is Pfeiffer on here, Chris? I thought I saw him on here. Am I missing him? There's so many names up here. Chris?
Thought I saw him right above Andy.
I
Can you hear me?
Yeah, is he above?
I'm here.
No, I don't. Chris,
Really?
you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Chris, are you okay with starting the meetings at 6:30 during, at least for now, during the winter months?
Yes, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay. Based upon that, I'll ask for a motion on the meeting dates as presented with a 6:30 start time, at least to start the 2021 year.
I'll make that motion.
I'll
A motion
second.
from Karen,
Yep,
second from Lynn. Shelley, you want to call the roll on the 2021 meeting schedule?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Hey, Paul, does that
Anybody
mean that the completeness meeting starts at 6?
Most likely, yes, it will.
Okay.
Yep, Jeff, it will. Depending on how many we have too.
Thank
You
you.
hear me, Jeff?
Yes, thank you.
And, but we'll go with 6. And just so everybody knows, January is our reorganization meeting. I'll have Shelley get all the reorganization stuff out to you ahead of time, so you know all the items that we have to approve at the January meeting. That will take about 20 minutes in the beginning of the start of the January meeting for everybody. Okay. Next, moving on to the first application tonight is John Baker, Block 649, Lot 15, in the Memorial section of Upper Township for 299 Burley Road in the township. I saw John up here earlier. There you are on my top right.
Go.
John, Joe, sorry, Joe Baker, sorry. Joe, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony that you're about to give before the board tonight's the truth?
Yes.
Okay, Joe, tell us a little bit about your application and why you're here and what you're planning to do, since you did put an addition on your home. Go ahead.
Yes. In the spring, I had gotten a new shed, and it was larger than the existing shed. The one I had did not, when I tore it down to its frame, there was some termite damage, and I couldn't rebuild it. I was going to just redo the shell of it. So since I had to tear it down anyway, I went and I got a bigger one, because the future addition that's going on is going to be inside space and can therefore not store any of the extra items that would normally go into a shed. So I got the bigger shed.
Okay.
I used the same foundation, did not go any closer to my neighbor, and did not go any closer to the road. I just extended the existing foundation 12 feet to the east, or
Okay.
south, actually.
And Joe, the shed is still under 200 square feet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Matt, you want to help start us off with some of the questioning of the applicant so we could work our way through this application?
Yes, Mr. Baker, the construction that's going on currently on the home, you reference in your application here that you meet all the zoning requirements of the lot coverage and lot area. Is that including the construction that's going on the main house itself?
Yes, the new construction was actually a enclosed porch, which was basically outside area. I had an entrance on one side and what was basically the shed overflow and mudroom on the opposite side. So it was a room that was split in two.
Under roof, correct?
Yes, it was all under roof already.
Hey, Matt, if
Yes.
you don't mind interrupting, just to note, Sherry has joined the meeting at this point
Oh,
in
yeah, I
time.
see her down below.
I just wanted to make that note. Sorry, Matt.
Can
Thank
you
you, Paul.
unmute Sherry there, Paul?
She's got control, so she's got to unmute herself.
Sherry, can you unmute yourself, please? When the time comes? Or just let the board know that you've joined the meeting.
Can you hear me, or
Yes, Scotch? No, I can't hear you, Sherry.
how about now?
Yes, now I got you.
There you go.
All right, I have to work too. Okay, thank you.
Okay, let the
Paul.
record reflect, Kelly, that Sherry Gallerizzi has joined the meeting. Okay, Matt, I'm back to you for your.
Hey, Paul.
Okay. Yep.
Paul,
Wait, go ahead. Go ahead,
can
Jeff.
you ask Sherry if she was on when the meeting started, at least when Mr. Baker started speaking? Yes,
Can
you
you
heard
say yes?
everything? All right, so
Yep.
then you can vote. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Go ahead,
Okay,
Matt, back to you.
Yeah, Mr. Baker, so the shed that's there is basically in the same spot that the old one was. Your lot is a corner lot, which makes it unique with two front yards and kind of restricts where you could put a shed. And it's also an undersized lot. Is there any other spot on the lot where this shed could be located and be conforming?
And be conforming, no. The septic is on the opposite side. And between the two variances that are involved in this, being 10 feet away from the neighbor and 15 feet away from the house, there is no spot on the property that will adhere to both those situations without being on top of a septic system or a water pipe.
And
well-
you have
well
not
pipe.
moved the shed closer. It is the same distance from the property line as it was previously, and it still meets the requirement of distance from the primary structure. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have.
Thank you.
Let me go right across my board here. Rich Mashur, any questions of the applicant?
No, Chris asked the same questions I was going to. Thank you.
Okay. Going next to you, Andy Shaw.
No questions. Thank you.
Lynn Petroza,
No questions.
Karen Mitchell.
No questions.
Okay. Sherry Gallerizzi.
No questions.
Mark, I saw you in there. Mark Pancos, any questions?
No questions here.
And did I miss anybody? Larry Truly?
The only question I had, Matt asked, and that was answered satisfactory.
Okay. And Joe, the only thing I'm going to say, you have a unique lot because it's on the corner and it's a corner lot with two front yards.
Yes.
Okay. Based upon that, is there any more questions of any of the board members?
No.
Okay, hearing none, I'll open it up to the public. You ready, Paul? Anybody from the public inside of 200 feet who cares to comment? Inside of 200 feet? Hearing no one, seeing no one, I'll close that portion. Is there anybody?
Actually,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
I'm actually Joe's neighbor, and I'm actually the only property.
Okay, sir. Wait a minute. Before you start, first of all, name and address for the record, please.
Bruce Johns, 406 Tuckahoe Road in Marmora.
Okay, raise your right hand, sir. Do you solemnly swear I know. Don't worry, it's blocking your face, but don't worry about it. Do you solemnly swear the testimony that you're about to give before the board tonight's the truth?
I do.
Okay, go ahead with your testimony about Joe Baker's application, sir.
I actually have the property that the shed abuts to, so I would be the closest neighbor to it. He was in communication with me the whole time, and I actually have no problem with it. And actually, I helped him do a lot of the work to get ready for it. So I think, he tried to save the old one. It wouldn't work. And, I have no issues, and it's next to my property.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anybody
Thanks,
else
Bruce.
anybody else inside of 200 feet who cares to comment? Hearing no one, seeing no one, I'll close the portion inside of 200 feet. Anybody outside of 200 feet who cares to comment? Outside of 200 feet? Once again, hearing no one, seeing no one, I will close that portion. Matt, you want to start us off with findings of fact on this? You there, Matt?
There we go.
Okay.
Yes, our applicant Joseph Baker, 299 Burley Road, Block 649, Lot 15, is looking for variance relief to put an accessory structure in a front yard and some setback relief. It is a 16 by 12 shed where a 8 by 12 shed previously existed. Mr. Baker has a unique lot that is a corner lot having 2 front yards, which limits the rear and side yards where a shed could be placed. And it is also an undersized lot, and that limits him even more. He is holding the existing setback of where the previous shed was. The septic well, existing structure, and 2 front yards limit the location where this shed could go, limiting it to where he has placed it. We had one individual from the public commenting on the application who is the next door neighbor who is the most affected individual, and they are in favor of the application and actually helped him prep for the shed installation. With all that said, I would be in favor of this application as presented.
Lynn Petroza?
Oh, sorry, I concur. I concur.
Okay, Rich Mashura? Rich?
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Comments.
Yes, go ahead.
George Washington Canal.
Anything to add to the findings of fact, Rich?
No.
Okay. My next line here, Andy Shaw?
Nothing to add. I concur with Matt's very fine testimony.
Thanks. Karen Mitchell?
Nothing to add. I concur.
Thank you. Sherry Gattarese?
Nothing to add on, I concur.
Okay. Mark Pancoast?
Nothing to add. I agree.
Larry Truly?
Nothing to add. Move forward.
Okay. Chris Pfeiffer?
Nothing to add.
Okay. Based upon that, I'll ask for a motion to approve the application as presented for the shed with the 2 variances that are in the current application.
This is Sherry, I motion.
Do I have a second?
Andy
Second,
Shaw.
Andy Shaw. Kelly, call the roll, please.
Mr. Mashura?
Yes.
Ms. Mitchell?
Yes.
Ms. Petrosa?
Yes.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Unsworth?
Yes.
Mr. Sassia?
And yes. Okay, Joe, your motion carries. You're set to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's help in this.
Okay,
Well-
next application for tonight is the Strathmere Motel. It's a continuation for block 834, lot 1, 513th Commonwealth Avenue in the Strathmere section of Upper Township. Let the record reflect that I am going to depart the meeting and turn this application back over to Matt Unsworth, who is here. Good night, everybody. Have a good Christmas, and I'll see everybody in January.
Bye, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Hey, Paul.
See you, Matt. Bye.
At last month's
Bye,
meeting,
everybody. Yeah, good night.
we told everyone that we would start at 7:30 with the Strathmere Motel application. So do you want to wait
Okay.
until 7:30 or do you want to
Yes,
do that now?
definitely wait till 7:30
Okay.
and we start right on the button end.
Do you need to swear Tiffany in?
We can? Or, you know what, let's do it all because we'll have to re-swear some of their professionals too, so we can do it all once we start. All right?
Let's start Strathmere and all its ancillary stuff at 7:30.
You know what? We do have some bills to pay. We could do that if you want
That's
to
fine.
get that out of the way. Okay. I have bills needing payment. We have Tiffany Cuviello for the professional services on the Strathmere Motel. We have
Matt, I'll
Shelley-
stay on until we get through the bills and then I can leave. How's that? So you'll
Okay.
have someone help you vote on those.
Good. I have Shelley Lee and I have Jeff Barnes legal. We have those 3 bills for approval. Can I get a motion on those, please?
I'll make the motion to approve the bills as presented.
I second
Yeah,
it.
I don't even know what they were, how much they were. You
I
don't
can-
have that?
I can tell you that.
Okay.
Tiffany's bill was for the 2 meetings and prep time, a total of $1,562.50. Shelley Lee's bill is $100, and Jeff Barnes' bill was an email to me. I believe it was $750 regular fee, and I believe it was $625 for hourly. Is that correct, Jeff? Do you know that off the top of your head? It was approximately $600 in billable hours as well.
That makes sense.
Make a motion to pay the bills as presented.
Motion. Sherry.
We have a motion from Paul, a second from who?
Sherry.
Thank you. Shelley, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Galderisi,
Yes.
Mr. Mishra,
Yes.
Ms. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Pankos,
Yes.
Petrosa,
Yes.
Mr. Pfeiffer,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Truly, Mr. Unsworth,
Yes.
and Mr. Kassashian.
And yes.
All right. So at this time, we'll take a 5-7-minute break, and then we will come back and start the Strathmere Motel continuation. Thank you.
Good night, everybody, again. Thank you.
See
Bye-bye.
you, Paul. Thanks.
Bye.
Hi, Paul.
See ya.
Matt?
Yes.
Mark Pancos is on the meeting. I don't think that we really need him to participate tonight. He wasn't at the last meeting either. So it's up, you might want to give him the option of staying or
Yep,
going.
There's Mark right there. Mark, do you hear that? If you'd like to leave the meeting tonight, we have enough board members to cover it without you. And because you missed the last one, you haven't heard all the testimony anyhow.
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind, I think my health is probably
Go
better off. I
go
appreciate
rest.
it. All right,
No, we
thank you.
appreciate
guys.
you being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Bye. All right, so I'll announce that Mark has left as well, that we do not need him for our quorum. All right, we are at 7:32 I've got here. Do we have everyone or who are we missing?
Probably wouldn't hurt to just take roll for the board members, and just when the board members that are off, not using their camera right now, just to verify that that they're online on the web and can see what's presented.
All right, thank you, Paul. Okay, at this time, we are moving back on the record for the continuation of the Strathmere Motel. We'll start by calling the roll of the board members. We do have one board member, Mark Pancoast, who has left the meeting, as we have the required number of board members without him being present. So Shelley, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Gallerisi?
Present.
Mr. Mashura?
Here.
Ms. Mitchell?
Here.
Ms. Petrosa?
I'm here and I can see everything.
Okay, Mr. Pfeiffer?
I'm here and I'm online. I can see.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shaw?
Yes, I'm here and I can see everything.
Thank you. Mr. Truly?
Yep, I'm here.
Bensworth?
I'm here.
Hey, Larry, are you online too to be able to see what's presented?
I'm looking at you right now talking.
Check.
Awesome. All right, and we already swore in Shelley and Paul Dietrich. Tiffany, are you there to be sworn in? Tiffany Morrissey?
I am here. Sorry,
Great.
trying
All
to
right.
undo my mute button while you're talking.
I can hear you. I can't see you.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, please. Will you raise your right hand?
Yes.
Actually, your name and address for the record first.
Tiffany Morris, 7 Equestrian Drive in Galloway, New Jersey.
And Tiffany is our planner for this evening. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, Tiffany. We're all set.
Okay.
All right. At this point, we are continuing with our application. We will hear from our board attorney, Jeff Barnes, first. We have received some revisions to the application, and Jeff is going to discuss those revisions briefly and what that means to our application, and then we will continue with the hearing as scheduled. Go ahead, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. As everyone on the board knows, and I suspect most of the callers, that this would be the third application for the Strathmere motel project. Since the second meeting, new plans have been submitted that made various revisions to what the board and the public had been viewing for the last two applications. Those plans removed a pod from the property, reduced the height, and made some of the bulk variances actually more conforming. The applicant submitted those plans to Shelley Lee, and they were posted onto the website 10 days prior. During this process, the attorney for the applicant, as well as the attorney for the objector, who you heard on the last application, provide some expert testimony, had some exchange of information as to whether or not the application of it in of itself needed to be dismissed with prejudice and the application amended. It's the position of this board, I suspect, based upon the research that we have, that the application itself essentially there's no new primary or ancillary uses being proposed or amended. The application with the modifications indicates that it's actually of a lesser height, lesser density, and perhaps more compliant with the actual zone itself. There's been 7 to 8 hours worth of testimony regarding this. This application is more, and the amendments are more akin to the Schmittenhauser versus Planning Board case, the Underwood Props versus the Planning Board of Hackensack, and it's distinguishable from the Lake Shore Estates versus the Denville Township Planning Board. Based upon that, it seems to make not only judicial sense, but in accordance to the law, to allow the applicant to provide some testimony as it specifically relates to what amendments took place to the plans, provide some specificity as to if there's a height decrease, was it for the entire building? What was the height? What is the height now? If there was a pod removed, where was the pod removed? If the units are smaller, how are they smaller? So that everyone on this Zoom has the opportunity to fully comprehend what changes happen. I think the applicant should have the ability to ask the experts that they've retained to provide some brief testimony if necessary to clarify. Having said that, Mr. Wendt and his experts have spent a considerable amount of time setting forth their testimony as to why they believe that the application should be denied. I think they should have every ability to continue on with their cross-examination, as well as provide any type of cross-examination as it specifically relates to any type of testimony that you hear as it relates to any of those amendments. Having said all that, I think it's appropriate for us to ask Tiffany whether or not she had the opportunity to review these amended plans, and if so, did she then have an opportunity to amend her report and share that not only with the board, but with Mr. King as well as Mr. Wendt.
Yes, I did review the revised plans. I did provide an updated report. It is dated December 10th, which is today's date. The report, I tried to keep in there what I had done originally so you could see the difference in the plans or what was changed. I have added in comments that they reduced the height of the building. I did have a question about the height of the building because it is a sloped roof, so I asked them just to verify what the slope of the roof is in terms of our ordinance requirements. And I also note that they reduced the size of the units and the size of the building in terms of square footage in order to better conform to the setbacks. And in doing so, the plan resulted in revisions that they no longer need the front yard setbacks on the side streets, which are Sherman and Sumner. They still require the front yard setback on Commonwealth. That The revised plans no longer require a lot coverage variance. They've reduced that down to below the 60% to 53.71%, and that they have reduced the building coverage, but when you include the decks, the building coverage still requires a variance. The building coverage without decks is around 26.7%, and with the decks, it's 34.63%, where 30% is required. And lastly, depending on the there's a setback requirement also for the rear to the steps that allow you up to the decks. The building meets the setback requirement, but the steps to the decks are 17 feet from the rear property line. The other update in my report really relates to, depending on the slope of the roof, whether or not that creates a flat roof or it meets the ordinance requirement, and would eliminate the D6 variance for heights. And so they're gonna have to just provide some general testimony on how that works. But the peak of the roof does in fact meet the 35-foot requirement.
Tiffany, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Jeff,
And-
is that complete your comment?
With one exception, and that is in the event that anyone that is an objector objects to allowing the applicant to continue forward with this amended application, I would just say that they can state that objection at an appropriate time. And when I say appropriate time, meaning at the time that the public is allowed to interject into the application and provide its comments.
Thank you, Jeff. So what that means is the board is going to hear the application with these revisions. We're at this time going to have the applicant discuss those revisions. We'll see if the board has any questions of the applicant's professionals regarding those revisions. And then we will continue on where the public portion and opposition opposition's attorney can then cross-examine the applicant regarding anything in the application, including those revisions. So at this time, Mr. King, are you there?
Yes, sir.
All right, you've got the floor.
Is my, oh, there it is. Share.
Rich, members of the board, I'm
Okay.
sorry to interrupt. This is Ray Wendt. I apologize. I did not see Tiffany's revised report. If Tiffany could just email that to me and I could forward that on to Mr. Hawk while the applicant presents the amendments.
I'll do that right now while we're on call.
Thank you.
I actually have it on my screen. I'll send it to Mr. Wendt. It's right here. I had the
Thank
email.
you.
Yep. Done.
Thank you.
Okay,
It was only
and Mr.
one
Wayne, if you have any difficulty receiving that, let us know and we'll stop things and make sure you get it. Mr. King, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the board and public, thank you very much for entertaining us once again. The system has worked. The object of the exercise is to, when you're presenting an application, is not only to speak, but to listen. And we have attempted to do that. We've considered the objectors' concerns, and equally as important, we tried to get a sense of the board's view based upon the questions asked at the prior meetings. As a result, we've revised our plans to mitigate the concerns to the extent we reasonably are able, while still constructing something that resembles an architecturally pleasing, economically viable, and functionally useful hotel. When we believe we have right-sized the hotel in very meaningful ways. We've taken up a lot of your time in our initial presentation, so I really don't want to do the whole dog and pony show again and take advantage of your kindness by letting us speak now. So I am not going to call my experts, except to the extent that the board has questions, specific questions. Instead, in 5 minutes or less, I'm going to go through and highlight the changes that exist on the plans that have been submitted to the board. The concerns expressed to us, at least as we perceive them, are related to mass, height, streetscape, coverage, and room size. in response to those concerns, we've done the following. And I would mention that these are sacrifices to our owner, to our client. But that's okay. That's everyone's interests need to be considered. So here they are: mass, height, streetscape coverage, and room size. With regard to mass, we've reduced the mass of the structure, and we've eliminated one of the pods, reduced from 6 to 5, thereby reducing the building size by nearly 20%, according to Ms. Cuviello's report, or Ms. Morrissey's, I'm sorry, Tiffany. And we reduced the volume of the habitable structure from 191,000 cubic feet to 108,000 cubic feet, a reduction of mass of 44%, which is now 20% less than the maximum volume of a by right single-family dwelling on this site. We reduced the height of the structure such that our roof ridge is the height permitted by the ordinance, 35 feet, and is no longer 40 feet. We've eliminated entirely the variances on Sumner and Sherman Avenue, even though they're both front yards. We have 3 front yards we have to deal with. And where our neighbors, the Coles, are located, we're actually 7 feet more from Sumner Avenue than is required by the ordinance. The building coverage was reduced from 34% to 27%. And even when we add in the exterior walkways, which are not decks, but walkways, it was reduced from 44% to 35%. And now we're 6% below the impervious coverage permitted for this commercial establishment. We've reduced the room sizes by 15%, and they are now only 600 square feet. And even though we're burdened by 3 front yard setbacks, and even though our rear yard would in most circumstances be a side yard with a very small setback, only 6 feet, our building is fully compliant with the rear yard setback. The building itself is compliant. And with our walkways, we're more than 17 feet from the side of the houses closest to us, which would ordinarily be a side yard against the sides of the other houses. And that's almost 3 times more than would be required by a traditional side yard. With the exception of some technical issues relating to the curve of a roof and whether that's sloped or not sloped, and a front yard setback that we have improved by 350% from the existing front yard setback, and a relatively minor building coverage deviation that is not even caused by the building itself, this hotel complies with the ordinance. We previously prepared a chart at the chairman's request comparing our hotel to that which is contemplated by the ordinance on a lot of this size. That was the village zone. And if Mr. McLeese can be permitted to put on his camera, bring up that chart. We're going to now show you a chart with our current proposal in that same zone. And this is the chart that Mr. Unsworth had previously asked us to do, but now we've narrowed on the village zone. Bill, can you turn down your volume?
Turn down?
Or mute your, we can hear my voice.
Okay.
Mr. King, if we are going to have Mr. McLeese testify, we can swear him in. If you don't think he's going to need to speak, then.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to need to speak. For now, he's just an IT guy.
Okay. Well, we'll stop if he does. Thanks.
If you go to the chart, next chart down, Mr. McLeese. That one, thank you. We prepared this chart, which compares our proposed building with the hotel contemplated by your ordinance, albeit in the town village section and not the resort commercial. But you can see that our building is now right-sized. It looks like a hotel should look. It is larger in lot area than is required. It has a larger lot frontage, a larger lot width, a larger lot depth. The front setback which is presently 2.5 feet, we've multiplied it by 4. It's only 1.5 feet short of what's required. But it's an improvement. We're 5 feet better than the front yard setback on the Sherman. We're 11 feet better on the other front yard. We conform in the rear yard setback in that zone. The rear yard to the stairs we've talked about, our building conforms, just that the stairs don't, and they face the sides of houses. We conform on the height. We conform on the maximum building coverage. In fact, we're only half of what would be permitted in a hotel in the town village. The building coverage with the deck, we are 3/5 of what would be permitted in the village zone. And the maximum lot coverage, we're far below the 70%. And we show this to you because we believe we are right-sized. This is what your ordinance thinks a hotel should look like. Now, we acknowledge that your resort commercial doesn't permit, well, it doesn't mention hotels, but we are an existing hotel. But as a hotel, but complies with flood, a modern, viable, not on the ground hotel that people will want to stay at, this is what your ordinance wants it to look like. We have right-sized it. And this was a direct response to Mr. Unsworth, your chairman's questions. We understand that our neighbors would like a clear view of the rising sun and a clear view of the setting sun, but that is not the promise zoning makes. My experts will testify to any of this in detail if necessary, but it's all summarized in the plans before you. We incorporate the prior testimony of our experts, who I believe had provided sufficient testimony to justify the prior building, but certainly in a building that is reduced as much as this one is. Their testimony, in my opinion, is overwhelming. It's incorporated, it's directly applicable. I would like to turn it over to the neighbors and the objectors, maybe even some in support, because they've waited a long time. But if the board asked that I have these numbers brought in any detail by Mr. McLeese, I will certainly do so, and he can talk more about the building. But I think that this is the important part, the numbers, and we've right-sized it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. King. Do you have all of your professionals available that have testified previously to this meeting?
Absolutely. So, well, they're supposed to be here. I haven't heard Mr. Bruce's voice yet. There's Mr. Landgraf, and I believe Robert Bruce is here as well.
All right. I am sure we're going to have some discussion or questions for your professionals. So let's just get them sworn in. Let's go down the line. Mr. Landgraf, I see your mic's on. So will you state your name and address for the record?
Certainly. Good evening. Lance Landgraf Jr., licensed New Jersey planner, 9 South Harvard Avenue, Ventnor City, New Jersey.
And raise your right hand. You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I certainly do.
Thank you. And Lance has previously testified on this application. Mr. McLeese?
Yes, sir.
Name and address for the record?
William C. McLeese, registered architect, state of New Jersey. The address of the office is 5 MacArthur Boulevard in Summers Point, New Jersey.
Thank you. Raise your right hand. Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Great. And is Mr. Bruce available? All right. Oh, do I hear you, Bob? All right. If we need Bob, we will track him down if you can make sure he's available.
He is signed on, Mr. Chairman, and he did text me. But
Bob, are you available to respond?
Whoa.
That sounds like Bob.
All right, we think Bob's around. All right, well, let's continue. Bob, if you could please mute your mic, we'll continue with the application. And at this time, we will go to Mr. Wendt. Are you available?
Yes.
All right, please proceed.
Members of the board, good evening again. My name is Ray Wendt. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Nemad, Davis, and Goldstein. I represent Christopher and Jessica Colas. First and foremost, with respect to the amendment to the plans and the discussion that we had back and forth about procedurally what is appropriate, I raised the issue because there is case law that indicates where an application is substantially changed, there should be at least a renoticing. I raised that, and I also mentioned that we're still ready to proceed, and that's on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Colas and our professionals. I cannot speak to the 115 people on a list that has been provided to you as to whether or not they are prepared or have seen any of these changes. So that's why I raised the issue, because although I represent just Mr. and Mrs. Colas, we have a common goal in terms of why everybody's here. So with that, we are ready to proceed. Mr. Hawk is reading Ms. Morrissey's report as I speak. With respect to why these changes were made, I don't know why they were made, but there's been comment that they were made in response to the objectors, at least in part. The problem I have with that statement is that these objectors have had a problem with the initial application well before the first hearing, and they voiced that opposition, and nothing was addressed until after 2 nights of hearings. So why my clients' voices have been heard and the other 114 objectors were not for months in advance escapes me. Too often when I do these objections, I go in and I see an application that asks for the world. And then midway, there's a tapering back. And it's presented such that the applicant would have you believe, well, I'm being reasonable because I'm compromising. And it happens all too often. So I don't pretend to be in the head of the applicant or his professionals, but asking for more and then knowing you'll go for less seems to be a play that I've seen over the course of 17 years of practice. With respect to the comment that the project has somehow been right-sized, number one, we don't agree with that. And number two, even if we did, it's still the wrong use. And comparing it to other districts in your township is inappropriate. Mr. Hawk will speak to that. And Mr. Hawk's presentation, fortunately, will be a little bit shorter because we were about to get into the height issue. So the timing of that is appropriate. But Mr. Hawk's testimony will substantially remain the same. There is one other aspect to this that I'd like to bring to the board's attention in terms of how to view this. And that's because I've heard the phrase, well, what is the highest and best use? That is a standard, respectfully, that is a standard that applies to the professional field of appraisals, where you hire an appraiser to establish the highest value possible on your property, either to obtain a loan or to sell or to buy. That is not a principle that applies to zoning. So I just want to make that clear, and it's confusing because you have a lot of standards between positive criteria, negative criteria, but you have standards and you have professionals that are going to guide you through that. Highest and best use is not that standard. That is not applicable here in this application. So I just wanted to clarify that so that we're all on the same page moving forward. With that, and subject to me closing with some comments, I'd like to reintroduce Mr. Stephen Hawk, who's our professional planner, to be sworn in.
Thank you, Mr. Wendt. And yeah, I'll swear Mr. Hawk in, and then I'm actually going to go back to our board engineer and our zoning officer and ask them for a clarification on the revised height and possibly go back to Tiffany as well, so we can be clear on whether what we're asking for, if there is variance relief still needed for that height, dependent on the roof slope. So let's get Mr. Hawk sworn in, and then we'll go back to the board professionals for a second. Okay, Mr. Hawk, name and address for the record, please.
Name is Stephen Hawk, and the address is 1158 Roberts Boulevard in Vineland, New Jersey.
Thank you. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Paul Dietrich, can we start with you on the revision, the building height, and your interpretation of how that complies or doesn't?
When we looked at it, it's not a traditional, because it's a curved roof, the ordinance says that, any slope that's less than 4 1 would be considered a flat roof, and therefore would have a 31-foot building height. You have to reduce the building height by 4 feet. And talking with the architect, Bill McLeese, the data that he gave us for the height difference, I'll say from the top of the fascia to the ridge, would lead it to, I think it ranged between like 2.6 and 3.6 in one. I think that one side, the front side of the roof has a different, I'll say the peak of the roof is not maybe centered over the building, so that slope, I think, on the front and the back has a little bit different. So given that just rise and run difference, would tend to, by the pure number definition, would lead it to that, we potentially have a flat roof. I think the architect, Bill McLeese, was going to, look to see if he could, get the 4 to 1, but, I hadn't seen any other documentation. So by pure numbers, I think you might have to consider it a flat roof.
So unless you've got something else for us to go by, it's your opinion we should treat this as a flat roof, which would lower the building height to 31 feet. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then they would need relief in that case as well. And I understand the building's been lowered substantially, but there is still relief needed. And that has been spelled out in the revisions and Tiffany's description. Tiffany, did you have any other comment on this as well? Or do you agree with Paul's finding?
I agree with Paul on this, and I do agree that they substantially reduced the height of the building. It is a unique type of roof. It's not a traditional roof, so given the measurements, I think to be conservative is probably the best way to look at this.
Thank you. Shelley, anything to add on the height?
No, not really. I agree. They have reduced the height, but I do agree with Paul. It is more like a flat roof.
It's
all right. Thank you,
Mr.
Shelley.
Chairman, can I address that? Yeah.
Sure.
I respect all of the professionals who've spoken, and I'm not going to say that I disagree with them. The only thing I do disagree with is it's not a flat roof. I mean, it's an architecturally really neat curved roof that's incorporated in the design. And we talked about it this morning. And, Bill McLeese could probably figure out an ugly hip type roof to put on it that would make it still be able to have the full floor, but be at 35 feet. And technically it would have the slope. Everybody's trying to figure out, how to calculate the slope on a curve. And I tried to look up the physics on that, and it wasn't easy, the calculus. So we just made a decision for good or for bad. I mean, we appreciate that, we have a D variance to begin with in terms of expanding non-conforming use. But we're comfortable presenting to you a building that has a ridge of 35 feet, which is lower than a lot of the houses we talked about last time, and is the same height, the same ordinance as our objector. Now, we understand that, we're not putting a traditional roof, it's curved, but we've just made a decision. We have an architectural design here. It's a beautiful building and it's neat. And the ordinance wasn't set for this curved roof, and we want to keep the roof nice, and we want to keep his design together. So we're asking you to be a ridge of 35. And the consequence of that is your experts think we need a variance because our roof is curved, not flat, not angled, but curved. Then we're going to have to live with that, because Bill worked hard to give you a nice design, and we're going to stick to it. And if Bill wants to say something about it, it's his design, but that's, I think, where we ended up. With all due respect, I'm not blowing it off. I'm agreeing that your professionals have said that, but that's the choice we've made. We don't want to put an ugly roof on it.
All right, Mr. King, thank you. And yes, we'll rely on our professionals, and by the letter of the law, there's not another way to calculate it where it wouldn't be considered a low slope or flat roof by our ordinance. So I'll instruct the board to treat it as a flat roof structure, which would make the maximum building height 31 feet. All right, at this time, Mr. Wendt, I believe you had Mr. Hawk ready to go.
Yes, I do.
Hey, Bob?
Yes.
Bruce, I think if you have a telephone on and your speaker on the phone, you got to turn one
Yes,
off.
I do.
You got to turn one off.
Taking care, turning the phone off.
There you go.
Turning the phone off.
Hey, Bob, while we've got you clearly, let's swear you in. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, Bob. Get name and address for the record, please.
Robert Bruce, 91 Mays Landing Road in Somers Point. That's my office address.
Thank you. Raise your right hand, please. You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Great. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Hawk and Mr. Wendt.
Mr. Hawk, if you could just briefly reiterate, very briefly, what you covered in the last meeting, and confirm for us that you've reviewed the revised plans, Ms. Morrissey's report, albeit you got it a few minutes ago, and continue your testimony from there, please.
Okay. Yes, I did get a chance to review the revised plans, and I just did review the letter from Ms. Morrissey. Unfortunately, I was reviewing it while I was listening to the testimony from Mr. King, so it was a little challenging to listen to and to deal with both. But yes, I have done that, and I do want to briefly go through what I've testified to so far. Very briefly, I appreciate Mr. Unsworth. I think at the conclusion of last meeting, he suggested that I'd be able to go through what I testified to at the last meeting. And essentially what I did at the last meeting was I first brought up the point about how different Strathmere is from other shore resorts, talked about various governmental maps and its status on those. I talked about how large the proposed building was going to be in comparison to the existing building that's there now. Even though there's the very much testified to reduction in units from 16 to 15, the building is roughly 3 times the size of what's there now. I went through the special reasons, general welfare, sufficient space, safer building for public and meeting the building code, desirable visual environment. But I thought that all of those were on the weak side because they could all be met by a building that is either a permitted use or a smaller use or a smaller building. And those special reasons could still be met under those circumstances. I refuted the flood argument in that since the building will be eliminated and the new building will be raised on pilings and have parking underneath, the construction of the raised septic system prevents floodwaters from flowing through it and would dissipate or displace more water than the existing building. I also talked about an application item about the encouraging coordination of public and private procedures, and gave a couple quotes from the Cape May County Comprehensive Plan in that there was a general statement about having hotels being meaningful to resort communities. They didn't specifically mention Strathmere, they just said it in general. But I talked about that comprehensive plan has a discouragement of developing in environmentally sensitive areas where there's high water tables and in non-sewered areas. I started to get into the negative criteria, prong 1, no substantial detriment to the public good. And in doing that, I went through several categories. I did not reach the 6th and 7th categories, which I'll go through just soon after this, or actually the 5th and 6th. The first one I went through was density, and I thought that the proposed hotel with its density of the amount of units on the amount of land area would be 5 times more than what's in the area based on units per acre. The density is not less with this newer application as far as the revised plans. The bulk of the building is less, but the density is not less because it's still the same amount of units. I talked about the difference in the proposed hotel to the immediate vicinity and the age of the dwellings and the architecture being out of character with what's proposed. The land use breakdown of most of Strathmere being residential, and the residential breakdown itself, single family versus multifamily, 94.4% single family homes in Strathmere versus with the remainder 5.6% being multifamily. Only 21 multifamily structures that I found in Strathmere, and they're all spread out throughout the community. And then this represents a cluster of multifamily all in one spot, being very out of character with the area. So with that summary, I'd like to go into the next part of the prong 1, negative criteria, and that is the height. And since the last meeting, the height has been reduced. And I think what we want to do is we want to go through these slides first. Is that what you'd like to do, Mr. Wen?
Yeah, let's take a look at the differences. We've provided the board with what we've marked as COLAS 5, which are revised overlays from what we presented in our previous application or previous objection. So if you could, Mr. Hawk, starting with the first screen, explain to us what we're looking at.
Okay, we're looking at an overlay of the proposed hotel versus or adjacent to or superimposed over the existing hotel. Keep in mind that the overlay that we have in this graphic is not the new hotel with regards to the pod amount. This shows the 6 pods, and there are 5 pods proposed now. But what this actually does is it was shrunk graphically, and it does show the black area along the top, which Mr. Went's cursor is showing, and then the black area on the side. And it shows that reduction of building area. It's not exact, but it's a graphical representation that we feel is accurate enough for this purpose. And as you can see, it has in that chart on that last screen, it shows the percentages of how the height, the width, and the depth of the building have changed. The height reducing by 12.8%, the width, which is the length, that's from Sumner to Sherman at 5.4%, and then the depth, that's from Commonwealth to the beach side of the property at 4.2% reduction.
Next slide.
Yep, that would be good. And this shows a representation of how the proposed hotel relates to the existing on the first application. The next slide shows a comparison of the two superimposed over each other. And it shows how with the second application, it is just slightly less wide and also, as you can see, not as high. And then this is that same slide that we had last time we presented our graphics, and it shows the box that would represent the hotel and how the box has changed from the initial application to the second application. As you can see from this vantage point, there's not a really big difference, and it's kind of slight from this perspective, looking at it from an aerial view and at an angle. Next slide. This is another representation of the proposed hotel and the box that would represent its size with the initial versus the now proposed. You can see the difference. There's a couple of landmarks in this photo that show that difference, that utility pole that's in the foreground and the water tower that's in the background kind of shows how there would be difference, but I think it graphically shows that it's not a tremendous difference, changing the perspective appreciably. And the next slide. And then this is another one similar to that vantage point looking from the bay side towards the beach. This is the opposite. This is looking from the beach side towards the bay, and it shows how the box has gotten smaller, but not in any appreciable amount. And this is another similar one looking at it from the Sherman Avenue vantage point, looking in a northwest direction.
Thank you, Mr. Hawk. If you could continue with your presentation.
Okay. Well, the next part that I was going to cover was under the negative criteria prong 1, no substantial detriment to the public good, and that was height. The height that has been presented now with the revised plan is a height that is meeting the ordinance, but it's meeting the ordinance, and this is key. It's meeting the ordinance for permitted use. It's meeting the ordinance for something that would be a building that would be contemplated under the township ordinance for something that's permitted. To me, the height, when you have a use variance, because the use is not permitted, the height really becomes a guide, and it is something that is subject to the board's review, something that is subject to the board's scrutiny. And just because 35 feet is the height requirement numerically and based on dimensions in the ordinance, it doesn't mean that a non-permitted use like a hotel, that should be the standard. And it's also looking at it very narrowly. It's looking at it in one dimension. We're only looking at this height dimension as one part of a three-dimensional structure. And when you factor in other limiting standards for this zone, namely one of them being parking, there's no building of permitted uses like an office or a retail store or a bar or a tavern or a restaurant. There's no way that a building like that, any of those uses, could be this big and this bulky. So based on the size of this structure, based on the size of this property and the amount of parking spaces that it can fit, I think the applicant now, instead of 19 spaces, has 20 spaces. If there were 20 spaces on this lot, the greatest size, the largest size that a retail use or an office use could be would be 4,000 square feet. And that would have so much less bulk and so much less area. And I think it's too narrow, and it's also too one-sided to say, oh, we've met the height standard, but they're meeting the height standard for a building that's much larger than what's permitted for permitted uses. And that's based on another limiting factor that would never allow a building to be of that size, and that's parking. In the case of a restaurant, which requires a certain amount of square feet, I think it's 50 square feet per, it's 50 square feet for each unit, and there could be 1,000 square foot restaurant. There could be a 500 square foot tavern based on the amount of spaces. It's basically 50 square feet for every parking space for a restaurant, and 25 square feet for every parking space for a tavern. So those buildings and those permitted uses based on the parking that can be provided on this site would be much smaller buildings than what's proposed in this situation, where you have a 12,000 square foot building with a lot of bulk. So it's a lot more bulk at that maximum height. And that's why I feel that that even though the height standard is met, it's kind of misleading, and it's a narrow view of that. And because it's a use variance and not a permitted use, the board does have has the ability to judge that and to not make it something that would be permitted.
What about the number of stories? Standing alone and also then in comparison to our own block, the block that we're on.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, one of the most compelling parts of this whole entire application, and it's the most compelling part because it was a very big part of the most recent master plan reexamination from, I believe it was March of this year, March 2020, and then got incorporated into the zoning ordinance that was adopted in May of 2020. And that is that the building height, I just got done the presentation based on building height, based on a numeric value, a dimension. The definition of building height in Upper Township actually talks about a dimension, and it talks about how you measure it, and from a foundation or a grade and to the whatever part of the roof and the peak and the slope and all the various other parts of it. But the last sentence of that definition, for a township-wide definition of building height, the last sentence flat out just says, but properties in the RR and RC zone. The RR zone, resort residential, RC zone, resort commercial, they only exist in Strathmere. So the properties in the RR and RC zone zoning districts shall be limited to 2 habitable stories above the flood protection elevation. And I think that that's such a key part of this application. It's listed in Tiffany Morrissey's report as number 2J, and that did not change with this revised application. The building got smaller, it got less bulkier, it got shorter. A few variances were eliminated, but 2J remains, and 2J remains unchanged. And 2J, to me, is probably one of the greatest reasons why this property is out of character with the rest of Strathmere, and especially with regards to this neighborhood. I have some numbers on stories and the amount of stories in buildings in Strathmere, because I was able to go through all of Strathmere and look at all the buildings, the residential structures, and analyze them with regards to the amount of stories. It was an analysis of 374 structures. I found that only 5 have 3 levels above the flood elevation. Essentially, I think out of those 5, I think all of them but 1 have a parking level and then 3 stories above it. I think there was 1 building that I saw that was truly 4 levels, completely 4 levels. So that only amounts to 5 out of 374. That's 1.3% of all of Strathmere has an arrangement where there's a parking level or a lower level that's at the flood zone and then 3 stories above it. These hotel pods and the structure that's proposed is going to have 4 or 5 of these pods with 3 levels above the floodplain, very much out of character. As a matter of fact, if you take the other amount of levels that are in Strathmere, 85% of all structures have 3 or 2 levels in all of Strathmere. And then there's 13.7%, the rest of the structures, a total of 50, are 1-level structures. So you'd have to say that not only is this development from a story perspective, the amount of stories above the flood plain or the flood level, it's not only different from all of Strathmere, it's also very different from what is immediately adjacent. And that's also as important in that it's being interspersed or put into an area where, and then this is a great slide that shows that, where there's a concentration of older homes and older 1-story cottages or 2-story structures, and exactly where your cursor is now on what would be the north side of Sherman and the south side of the other street to the north, Sumner. you could see that that's a high concentration of either older two-story or cottages. I have them at house number 2, 5, number 9, number 13, number 14, number 17, number 21, and number 22 on Sherman are all those smaller stature structures. On Sumner, which is to the north of the site, number 6, number 10, number 14, number 18, and number 22 are all that same type of vintage 1 or 2 story structure with, you not only don't have multiple stories above the floodplain, because of the fact that these are 1 or 2 story structures, you have either 0 or 1 story above the flood level. So I think based on that, that's why this proposed hotel at this amount of stories above the flood level is so different and so out of character, and not in keeping with the neighborhood and the character of the neighborhood. The courts basically have said that the board has to find that the deviation is not unreasonable in the particular environment. And if you base it on just stories alone, the deviation is unreasonable in this particular environment in Strathmere. And especially when you give it weight against the fact that the master plan, which I'll go through soon after this, the master plan and the reexamination report specifically address bulk and height and stories. And I'm not talking dimensional height because of the way that ordinance definition is. It's based on stories. Stories is the first line of defense to me with regards to building height. It's purposely put in there that they wanted building height as a numeric value to be the second line of defense, but the first line of defense to keeping Strathmere and its buildings at a lower level is the amount of stories. And this application is violating that during the year of a fresh master plan.
Now, just so we're clear before we move on, even though the applicant has amended the plans to reduce some variances and obviously the height and the width, are we still looking at substantial interference with views of the sunsets, horizon, and other block views?
It appears that it would, especially from some of the lower structures. They're certainly not going to see with a higher building of this bulk. Now, keep in mind, I know that there can be a building of this height, but when you have a building of this height with this much bulk and with that third story above the flood level instead of the second story, there will be diminished views towards sunsets and sunrises from each direction. Whether you actually see the sunset on the horizon because of this or won't see it is not something I'm able to speak to, but you definitely, because of that extra floor, you will not see it for a certain distance. So it does diminish the sunset views and the sky views, and it does have an impact on the neighborhood.
Thank you. As a matter of housekeeping, before we move on to the next issue, you'll see on my screen there, one of the PDFs is labeled PowerPoint presentation. That, in fact, is Colas 5. It's labeled that way when I open it, but for some reason, when it shows up in my PDF viewer, it just says PowerPoint presentation. But that is 12 PDF pages. Mr. Dietrich, that is the Colas 5 exhibit that I sent to you. My apologies, it doesn't show up that way on the screen tonight.
All right. Thank you for putting that clarification on the record, just so the record's clear. Appreciate it.
Moving on now, Mr. Hawk, on the negative criteria, prong 2.
Yes, and that's substantial impairment to the zone plan and zoning ordinance. The way I look at prong 1, it's kind of like an assessment of the project versus what's there now. And then this is an assessment of the project based on what could be there in the future, because the master plan and the reexamination report are all about the future and protecting the future. So it was interesting to go through the re-examination report and also previous master plans. And I saw that as far back as 1994, there was concern in the 94 master plan over development and overdevelopment in Strathmere. Like I said before, the re-examination report was passed by the planning board in March of 2020, so it's very recent. And then the ordinance to implement that master plan re-examination report was just passed about 7 months ago. Exhibit 14, which I think you had up just recently when I was speaking, had to do with the preamble to the 2 zones in Strathmere. I thought that was meaningful to see that. It says, and I have an underlined version of it, of that preamble. And yes, it does have a passage underlined that has to do with the rural residential zone, in that building coverages, floor area ratios, and heights are utilized to ensure the scale of the residential structures maintain the charm of Strathmere and Whale Beach and not result in larger structures. The next line, it's not underlined, has to do with the RC district, and that there's a desire to have relatively small retail and service establishments and may be located. I think that the 2 zones really interact with each other and interrelate with each other and affect each other, because the RC zone is so narrow and so linear. It's only along Commonwealth Avenue. So anything that happens in the RC zone is something that impacts the RR zone, because the RR zone is right up against every property in the RC zone. And then also, I think it's appropriate to have the underlying passages in the RR zone in this preamble, because these are residential uses that are proposed, and these are essentially multifamily residential uses if you break it down for how these hotel units are going to be utilized. They wind up being, like I said before at the last meeting, triplexes essentially, and are residential in nature. And in moving along those lines, basically, the negative criteria prong 2, the courts have said, that zoning should be by ordinance and not by variance. They also, the courts, I've seen passages in court rulings that the second prong, this negative criteria second prong, is like a safeguard against improper variances being granted, because it's a tougher test and it's something that has to be met. And especially, it's a tougher test in this case because of how recent it is and how much input and how much community involvement and meetings and back and forth and resolution over what should be part of that reexamination report, and then ultimately what wound up being part of the zoning ordinance. And it winds up being a situation where I think it's harder to overcome because of that recent vintage. Exhibits 15, 16, and 17 are the next items I'd like to look at, and they are actually the reexamination report, and parts of that has to do first with the page 2 of part 1, which is the major problems and objectives from 2018, which was the prior re-examination report. And you can see that there's a paragraph dedicated right to Strathmere. And unfortunately, I can't read that at the magnification that you have it, but I have it right here in front of me. The township believes there should be an appropriate balance, and the development and controls should be reviewed to reduce overbuilding. Some items of concern include the size and the height of the structures and lot coverages. So that is something that, as you can see, it's been a concern. It became a concern officially with the establishment of this reexamination report, and it's something that has to be considered when reviewing this application for a use that's not permitted and a building that's bulkier than what it could be if it was a permitted use. The next one is changes since the last report, which also has a dedicated area. It's actually changes in assumptions, policies, and objectives. And there's a paragraph that's dedicated to Strathmere. The one that you have up is in the changes in assumptions, policies, and objectives. And basically, there are unique conditions that influence development on the island and are not present on the mainland. And I think that that's important because when I go into another part of my testimony, I'm going to talk about the fact that there should be no comparison to any structure or any building or any use in Strathmere and compare it to a mainland development ordinance or zone, because I think that it's been established and well established in this re-examination report that Strathmere is unique and Strathmere has its own character. And to compare the two, especially when the building height definition has taken Strathmere and put it all by itself and based height based on stories, I think it's pretty compelling that you can't take standards in one part of the municipality and just extrapolate them into Strathmere. That second paragraph down at the bottom of the page basically have development controls to reduce overbuilding. Some items of concern include the size and the height of structures and lot coverages. So that's kind of like a repeat of that last item. And then the last item, which would be Exhibit 17, it has to do with building height. There again, it's under the heading of Strathmere, and it basically says the third floor are proposed to be restricted so that there's consistency. Well, the third floor has to do with the rooftop access and the fact that there were some rooftop access points and cupolas acting as a third floor. But the underlying part, they're proposed in a way to restrict so that there is a consistency of building heights across the island. And yes, I'm going to say it again, this building does meet the numeric height standard, but it's for a building that's bulkier and it's for or involves a building that has one more floor than permitted based on the ordinance.
Now, again, by way of housekeeping, Mr. Hawk, you've referenced exhibits 15, 14, 15, 16, and 17. In fact, we're referring to Colas 1, which is 16 PDF pages that we previously submitted.
Right.
Okay, so again, when there's reference to that exhibit 15, 16, 17, that's really, we're talking about what's on the screen, which has already been submitted as Colas, as part of Colas 1. Thank you.
Correct. Some other items that were brought up in the reexamination report was size of structures has raised concerns. The township believes there should be an appropriate balance in the development and control should be reviewed to reduce overbuilding. Concern on size of height, concern about the size and height of structures and lot coverages, creation of duplexes in a single unit. All of these should be reviewed and controls created to preserve the character of the Strathmere area. And that's exactly what was done with that development standard for the definition of building height and putting in a story limit in Strathmere. There was a mention during the testimony from the applicant that you try to match the same type of requirements as they did in other districts that permit a hotel. And like I said previously, I definitely disagree with that just because of how different Strathmere is. Every municipality has a right to have different intensity to zones, and they could have business zones in different parts of a municipality. But those different districts and those different business zones can have different standards, and those different standards can reflect the character and basically the integrity and the what is desired for those different areas. And like I said, I think it's very unfair and inappropriate to compare standards in another part of Upper Township with Strathmere. There was an application statement that the township needs to explain why the use of a hotel is omitted from the list of permitted uses, and I don't think that that's required. I think just not listing it as a permitted use or not listing it at all is appropriate. I'm sure that the people doing the master plan and being involved with the master plan along with the governing body knew that there was a hotel here. They chose, I think, probably very specifically to not have a hotel as a permitted use. Bars and restaurants are permitted. I'm not sure the reason for that as compared to a hotel, but one thing I can think of is that with bars and restaurants, people come to them, they patronize them, and then they leave them. With a hotel, it's a little bit more of an intense use. People come and they stay and they're there, and maybe that intensity wasn't something that was desired for Strathmere, and that's why it's not listed as a permitted use. So I think that that was purposeful and something that the governing body possibly contemplated.
And this is particularly so here because the interior of these units are designed almost like a second home. We've got kitchen area. There was even testimony that it was anticipated that during a week-long stay, not everyone's going to go out every night of the week and instead entertain or dine at home. To me, that sounds like a second home, even if it's just for a week.
Yeah, I'm going to go into that in my next bit of testimony. I just have a little bit of follow-up or finish up on the negative criteria prong 2, and something that I was able to research. I researched if there were any shore communities that did not allow hotels, and I found that Harvey Cedars and Surf City do not allow hotels. I also found that Longport has a few existing hotels, and they're permitted to remain, but no new existing hotels are listed as a permitted use in Longport. So it's not completely out of the possibility of having a shore community and not having a hotel permitted. And I think this shows that Strathmere is different, and it's similar to these communities in that these communities have chosen not to have a hotel in a shore resort. All right, the next part of my testimony would be what I feel is a site plan issue, and it does affect the use, and it does affect what's proposed, and that has to do with parking.
Mr. Hawk, before you move on to the next point, I'm sorry to interrupt. I had a follow-up on that. Is it fair to say that Strathmere is more akin to a Harvey Cedars or a Longport as compared to an Atlantic City?
I would say it's closer to those than Atlantic City, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
That's all right. I actually think Strathmere is in a category unto itself, that it's even less of a developed area, given the fact that it doesn't have public sewer, and it has even more quaintness and character and lower buildings. The site plan issue that I anticipate with regards to this application, and I think it's a limiting factor on development and limits really the intensity of this lot, is that is parking. There's a situation where there's going to be, I guess, 20 spaces proposed. That's what it looks like on this new plan instead of the 19 that were initially proposed. And the applicant mentions that they meet the parking requirement, and I would differ from that. Yeah, okay, yeah, you meet the parking requirement if you simply take the units and multiply them times 1.25, but that's the parking requirement for a permitted hotel use in a zone that allows them. This zone does not allow hotels, and the standard is a guide. The standard of 1.25 parking spaces per unit is a guide to me. And the way I think that I would advise a board to look at it. And the reason why it's a guide, especially in this case, is because this hotel is not going to be like any other hotel that we typically see when we think of a hotel. When we think of a Hampton Inn or a Wingate that's at the interchange of a limited access highway with another heavily traveled street, where you'll see a business person come in and stay for the night, sometimes arriving late in the afternoon, just needing a place to sleep. and then go to a meeting the next day or some kind of appointment the next day and be out of there. To me, these are less of a hotel unit than they are a vacation suite or an apartment. I think they're more along the lines of a vacation suite. There's such a big difference between a typical hotel room of 200 square feet roughly, with no kitchen and only 2 rooms, when you have these vacation suites that will function like a small apartment, 600 square feet, practically 3 times the size of a typical hotel room. They're going to have 3 rooms because there will be a separate bedroom. You'll have a kitchen in these facilities. Families could stay there. You're going to have visitors. I can't imagine someone renting one of these suites per week and not inviting anyone to come down and spend the day on the beach with them and then come back and shower or have a meal. So the intensity of these units is going to warrant much more than the 1.25 parking spaces. That's the ordinance guide in this case. This is going to be more along the lines of needing 2, 2.5, 3 spaces when you think about how it's actually going to be used. How if a family comes down and you have the 2 parents and one parent comes down first and the second parent comes down second, you're looking at 2 cars for sure in that case. If you have a family with a couple of kids that are driving age, chances are they're going to drive separately. You might even have 3 or 4 cars. And then if you factor in visitors, you're going to have a large amount of cars, and they're really going to impact the neighborhood. And there's going to be quite a bit of use of street parking given this intensity. I think you'll find from some of the testimony that's going to be given by the neighbors, they'll give evidence and testimony of what they've witnessed at this site, with a smaller hotel, with less intensity, with no kitchens or less kitchens. And they'll tell you that 16 or 17 space parking lot that's there now with a lot less intensity gets filled up and overflows. So proportionately, with this huge change in intensity and just a small increase in parking, I think you're definitely going to have a parking issue, and it really should. Parking should drive this, and parking should drive the intensity of the use that's proposed, because it's not a permitted use in the district. Moving on to parking and into some other aspects of the application, I'd like to actually bring
Mr.
in.
Hawk, let me stop you for just 1 second here, just to give you a heads up. Around 9 o'clock, we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes or so. So just to give you a heads up, if you get to a point where it's a good stopping point, let me know.
I appreciate that. I think I'm going to be done before then. I'm going to bring up the subject of floor area ratio, FAR. That's basically the ratio of how much square footage of floor area compared to the lot size. And even though there isn't a floor area ratio standard for the RC zone, the resort commercial zone, these are essentially residential uses. And a residential use, a single family home, is permitted as a conditional use in the RC zone. And it is something that is subject to a floor area ratio. That permitted floor area ratio based on the ordinance is 0.54. This structure, given its floor area of close to 12,000 square feet, is going to have a floor area ratio of 0.75. So it's quite a bit bigger in floor area ratio than what would be permitted if it was a single family home, or if it was a residential use coming over into that district. So I think that's important to point out, that the floor area ratio and the bulk of this building is much bigger than the floor area ratio that's contemplated for the RR district. And
you're speaking to the floor area ratio, and we're talking about the C variances at this point. There's been commentary in this, during this application, that perhaps the C variances get subsumed by the D variances, meaning if you're okay with the D, considering everything, you don't really have to consider the C in terms of making a decision of granting each C variance. Is that your position, or do you have a different position on that?
I feel differently on that. You know, in the William M. Cox treatise, there is a couple passages on that, and he basically doesn't say that variances are subsumed or shall be subsumed. In 31.5, the section on William M. Cox book, the board may have variances subsumed and not shall. And I'm going to go into my analysis on that with Price versus Himeji case. But Cox also talks about, and I'll quote the book, the very fact that a side yard or front yard variance is necessary might be taken as an indication that perhaps the site is not suitable or that the relief could not be granted without substantial detriment to the public good. So such a case should be carefully scrutinized. Now, the applicant has eliminated some side yard variances and eliminated some front yard variances. I think one front yard variance still remains, but I'm going to make the argument that there's a parking issue or a parking variance. And I'm also going to make a claim that there's a floor area ratio issue. So there are some bulk and some site-related deviations, in my opinion, that do require scrutiny and do require the board to analyze this very intense use that's not permitted because of those deviations. And in the Cox book, it says that the best practice of the board is to clearly deal with all the variances specific to the application, bearing in mind that, as stated in O'Donnell versus Cox in KOCH 197 New Jersey Super at 143, the board has a duty to take cognizance of all variances required for a particular application, even if the applicant does not address them. And that's where I want to go into Price versus Himeji. It's been talked about a couple times during the testimony, and it's referenced all the time, not only for a situation where variances are subsumed, but it's often used in land use cases and in testimony about site suitability. But in Price versus Himeji, I'd like to put that case in context and compare it to Strathmere and what's happening in Strathmere or what's proposed in Strathmere. In the Price versus Himeji case, it was a proposed multifamily building, 5-story, 60 units in Union City, New Jersey. And Union City is basically near where the New Jersey side of the Lincoln Tunnel is. And I'm not going to base my analysis based just on that, but if you can imagine the New Jersey side of the Lincoln Tunnel and compare it to Strathmere, there's quite a difference in that. But what's most important is the differences in the specifics of the case. And that is, in Price versus Himeji, there was a ruling that the variances were subsumed, and that's because of one key thing. The applicant's proofs demonstrated that the problems associated with the greater density, that was the 5-story structure and the 60 units, were accommodated on the site, meaning the site could handle it. And you had a situation in that Price case up in Union City, is that there was a much more dense zone across the street that allowed even greater height to buildings and more density than those 60 units on that structure, on that property. Multifamily dwellings with higher heights were in the zone next to that Price site, or actually the Himeji site, because Himeji was a developer, and they were bigger. The board got the applicant to reduce the height and density during the process, and the board concluded it would conform to the neighborhood. So in the Price versus Himeji case, the building that was proposed and at question was one of the smaller buildings and least dense buildings in the area. This case is just the opposite. It's the more dense use, and it's the more dense site, and it's the higher structure as far as stories go. So I think that there's I think comparing this or saying that Price versus Ameji applies to this case is not appropriate because of those reasons. And specifically in Price versus Ameji, they concluded that there was adequate parking for the 60-unit structure. There was public transportation. You don't have that in Strathmere. I've already told you that I don't think there's adequate parking. There was nearby higher and denser buildings, and there was a dense zone across the street. It was also planning area 1, a metropolitan planning area, and it was in a municipality, Union City, that was fully built out and depended on redevelopment. And it also removed several non-conforming lots and several non-conforming structures. So I really think that the board has to analyze not only the use variance itself and the use that's not permitted, but also the site-specific dimensional and or functional aspects like parking and floor area ratio. I think they need to analyze them and scrutinize them and make them part of their deliberations. And I basically just have a summary, and I should be able to get it done within 5 minutes. My summary is basically this. You have positive criteria and you have negative criteria. And the positive criteria are the benefits, and it's the weighing of those benefits versus the weighing of the negative criteria or the detriments. And substantial detriment to the public good can't take place, and substantial impairment of the zone plan can't take place, and they're on the detriment side. And how do you measure that word substantial? Because every time you have a variance, you definitely have a detriment. But the reason why the detriments are substantial is because of how much out of character this building is compared to the rest of Strathmere and the immediate vicinity, like the testimony I gave, and then how much it impairs the recent master plan and the zoning ordinance that was just passed with regards to stories. Those are heavy and strong detriments against what I feel are weak benefits that wind up being benefits that can be achieved with a smaller building and a building that's permitted in the district. And yes, you'll get a better landscape site, and you'll get some trees along the street, and you'll get a better looking building, and you'll get a safer building. But that could all take place with a smaller structure or with a permitted use. And that's why I feel on the positive side, it's much weaker than the strength and the heaviness of the detriments. And that's why I feel both prong 1 and prong 2 are definitely substantial detriment to the public good and a substantial impairment of the zone plan and zoning ordinance.
And in
And
closing,
that's my testimony.
thank you, Mr. Hawk. And in closing, I know I asked you this before, but I'd like to close out with the same question to you. Are all of your conclusions within a reasonable degree of certainty in the field of professional planning?
Yes, they are.
With that, members of the board, I think we're coming right up to 9 o'clock, which would be a great break for me to introduce our septic expert, Sandy Mirsky, when we return.
Okay, Mr. Wendt, we will do that. Mr. Hawk, stay close by. We'll come back in about 10 minutes. I'm going to see if the board has any questions for Mr. Hawk when we come back, and then we will go into your next witness. Everybody that is here patiently waiting their turn, everybody from the public that wishes to speak will get an opportunity. Again, we will assess where we are about 10:30 and start shutting down for the evening at that point. But when we get back, we'll return with Mr. Wendt and his witnesses. 10 minutes from now, we'll start again. Thank you. All right, it's 10 after. Let's get everybody back to it here. Give everybody a minute to get organized. All right, we are back on the record here. I am going to take a brief second here and go down our, I'm going to poll our board members to see if they have any questions of Mr. Hawk at this time. So I'll very quickly go down our list, and if you don't have any questions, just please state so. Sherry Gallerisi, do you have any questions?
No questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Mishora?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Mitchell?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Petrosa?
None at this time.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
No, thank you.
Mr. Shaw?
I do have a couple of questions.
Fire away.
During your testimony, Mr. Hawk, first off, am I to understand your assertion is that there is substantial impairment to the zone plan because there's not enough parking places, even though the applicant has conforming number of parking places now and proposes to have a conforming number of parking places?
No. To clarify my thought on that is that there's substantial impairment of the zone plan because of the amount of stories that are proposed above and beyond what's permitted in the Strathmere section of the municipality. I also think that the functionality of the site will also impair the intent and purpose of the zone plan because parking will not function appropriately based on the amount of spaces that's provided. I made the statement that 1.25 spaces per unit is a guide in a case of a use variance. And I don't feel that 1.25 spaces as a ratio per unit, which I think is more appropriate for a typical business person or typical hotel at a interchange, does not reflect a vacation suite or an apartment type arrangement with a kitchen that's proposed. So I think that the parking ratio is off. I actually didn't mention that Wildwood has a standard of 1.8 parking spaces per unit for a one-bedroom hotel, condotel apartment. I looked at Wildwood standards and saw that they had that standard, and I think that's a better standard. I think even 2 or 2.5 or 2.25 is a more appropriate standard and will allow the site to function better.
All right, so you also provided that you thought there would be substantial detriment to the public good because this hotel is above flood elevation. It's 3 stories and the surrounding houses are 1 or 2 stories. Are those houses compliant with the flood elevation that you looked at?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that the answer or that's relevant. It's new construction has to comply with the flood ordinance. These are older buildings, and I think the real thing that I was comparing in that aspect was the fact that there are lower levels of stories, meaning 1 or 2 story structures from the ground up compared to 3 full stories above the flood elevation, meaning that there's essentially four levels proposed by the hotel, and that a 4-level building in Strathmere is very rare. There's only 5 of them out of 374, I believe is the number, and it winds up being 1.3%. So that's why I feel it's out of character and it is a detriment to the public good. Substantial.
All right. In your analysis and looking around Strathmere, did you look at the lot on the west side of Commonwealth Avenue between Putnam and Prescott?
The west side of Commonwealth between Putnam and Prescott. It's an empty lot, or is it the trailer, the rental trailer area?
It's the rental trailer area.
Okay.
So did you take a look at the use on that particular location?
Yes, I did.
So when I look at that particular location, I see 16 units on a street that fronts on Commonwealth that has access both from 2 side streets, and so that's a functioning. I mean, they're doing business. They're open now, and this hotel doesn't seem to be that different from that use.
From that same density, you mean? Yeah, if you compare it to, I don't know the exact density of the trailer, the seasonal trailer business that's there, because they're not a year-round operation, right? They leave in the fall.
It's
seasonal.
There's 16.
Right, and that would have a similar density, but I thought the distance of those trailer spaces, those seasonal trailer spaces, from the immediate vicinity and the density around where the proposed hotel is, that it was a detriment and definitely out of character with what's immediately adjacent to the hotel. When I did my analysis on density, I think I analyzed the 3 blocks in either direction, north and south, on the beach side of Commonwealth.
Okay. Okay, I don't have any further questions at this time.
Thank you, Andy. Larry Trulli, any questions? Larry Trulli, you there? All right, Larry, if you can hear me and you want to chime in, please do. Mr. Hawk, I just have one question. You had put up some slides showing the shaded area of the structure, both the previous drawings for the application and the revised. And I'm trying to get a feel for what the volume of the new structure as currently proposed versus the previous structure in more of a numeric sense, cubic feet or something of that nature. If you could give us something, and if you need some time to work on that and come back to it, that's fine as well. I don't know if you can address that now or not.
Well, it's actually in the applicant's chart. I'm seeing a difference between 191,000 cubic feet and 107,000 cubic feet roughly. Unfortunately, when you have that graphic display, it doesn't take into consideration the indentations in the building and the various spots that are not in a perfect cube or in a perfect 3-dimensional graphic that we had up on that screen. So there is a reduction in cubic footage if you take the confines of a floor and a wall and a ceiling. But what that graphic was displaying was the outline or the outer boundaries of that, that bulk of that building. Does that help you out?
It does, and the two numbers that you just referred to, and Mr. King, you may be able to elaborate on that. The volume of the existing structure versus the volume of the proposed structure. Do we have those figures?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that is what you asked, and I think Mr. Hawk thought the same thing. I thought you asked what we had last time versus what we have now. And that
No,
was
I'm
the
looking,
191,000
for
versus.
the existing old motel versus the new proposed hotel. What are the volumes of each?
I know we did that exercise last time and it got corrected, and then we all agreed to a number. I don't recall what it was. Mr. McLeese may recall. And I will get that answer for you in a moment.
Okay.
I have
give it
the
to
chart.
Al.
I could give you those numbers if you'd like, or Mr. McLeese can, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I have it here on the chart. I calculated the existing building is 67,889 cubic feet. And I think that Mr. Dietrich was in agreement with that. Our original was 109, or I'm sorry, our original application was 191,000 cubic feet. And the proposed now with the revision is 107,982.
Got it. Okay. Thank
Mr.
you very
Unsworth?
much.
Mr.
Yeah.
Unsworth?
Yes.
While we're just on the topic, could we perhaps get the volume of the gray blobs that are on the screen?
Mr. Hawk, is that something that's doable on your end?
I'm sure we can come up with something, yeah.
Okay. If you could work
And
on
like
that,
I
please.
said, they're a representation of what we feel is the outer edges of the building, not taking into consideration the indentations in the building.
Understood.
That's just preparing you for the huge number that's coming that has nothing to do with the size of our building, but that's okay. It's a preview. So we'll see what number comes back.
Understood. All right, Mr. Wendt, if you'd like to get on to your next witness, please.
Yes, at this time, I'd like to introduce Sandy Mirsky, who is our expert regarding the proposed septic system. Mr. Mirsky, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Sanford S. Mirsky. More, less?
Address as well, please.
Okay. Address is 5902 Ventnor Avenue in Ventnor City, New Jersey.
And raise your right hand.
Address 479 Centennial Boulevard in Voorhees, New Jersey.
And raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you all. I guess just to give a quick intro on myself and qualifications. I know we gave that earlier, but I am a professional engineer in New Jersey. My specialty is septic system designs. In fact, that's all that I do. We have a 15-person company that generates roughly somewhere around 1,000 plans per year and has for probably 32 years at that same level. We've worked with septic systems in at least 25 different local jurisdictions, as well as probably at least once a month on a DEP level project. And we designed septic systems.
Mr. Mirsky, we do accept your credentials, and you have that testified already. Thank you.
Now, that all being said, I have to say just at the onset that I'm actually really surprised to see a project of this magnitude going forward without some form of septic system approval to begin with. My personal feeling, to cut right to the chase at the onset, is that I do not feel that there's any septic system or on-site treatment system that is going to be viable for this project, and I intend to explain that as we go forward. First off, just as a quick background, there are two levels of septic system oversight. One is at the local level, which would be the Cape May County Health Department. The other would be up at the DEP. Basically, there's many complications as to who does what or many different interpretations, but essentially projects that generate under 2,000 gallons per day and require no variances or no waivers whatsoever from NJAC 7:9A can be approved at the local level at the Cape May County Health Department. Because this is either new construction or reconstruction, depending on how you look at it, the system must meet all standards whatsoever in that in 7:9A basically to be approved at the Cape May County level. If you're over 2,000 gallons, if any waivers are required, if you can't meet 7:9A standards, you must go to the DEP. And then there's certain instances where the local health department can review something, send you up to the DEP for clarification, and then come back to the local health department again. As I understand it right now, through doing some OPA requests and research, it appears that all we have right now is that a plan was submitted to the Cape May County Health Department. It was denied. At least as of a few weeks ago, that seems to be where we are right now. In terms of the design of the septic system that was put forth by Mr. Bruce, Mr. Bruce did his calculations based upon 130 gallons per unit, I'll call it motel unit, and then 15 gallons to cover one employee, coming up with a total of 1965 gallons, which is under the 2,000 gallon threshold. And that was submitted to the Cape May County Health Department. It was denied for various reasons, and some of them were fairly vague, but I believe the Cape May County Health Department realized this was out of their league and basically were directing everybody to go to the state to get their approval, which can be a fairly long and complicated process. The situation is really this. I'm going to kind of jump into a few definitions, and I'll try to be brief on this, but hopefully many questions I can answer. In the code, a motel is under a category that's called congregate living. It's in the same category as bunkhouses, dormitories, fraternities. I mean, you name it, they all fall in this thing of congregate living. But people have to realize that a motel really is a motor hotel. That's where the name came from to begin with. A motel, by many definitions that you could look up online or just from at face value, is typically your roadside motel, your highway interchange motel, where people stop for a night or two. They do not have any amenities in the room. There is no cooking, there is no washing, and generally there's some shared common function, which could be baths, which could be laundry facilities, and so on and so forth. It's basically motor hotel, car stop. They park in front of their unit, they go in, they come out the next day, and they leave. And that is what a motel is. When you graduate to a hotel, which essentially is a place for people to stay, possibly for a couple of nights, certainly not residential use by any means, but for more than one night, maybe two or three, and that's really a vague definition up to interpretation. The rules say that a hotel septic system must go to the DEP initially.
I'm sorry. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I loathe to interrupt, as hopefully I have evidenced throughout and not interrupted once, but I'm having some trouble understanding why the expert is talking to the board about how to interpret a regulation that this board doesn't have jurisdiction to regulate. We understand that we need approvals from appropriate state and county agencies. We know that, and they're the ones who decide this interpretation of congregate living or whatever the case may be. So before we pretend that we are before that board and do all of this exercise, I don't understand why we need to do that exercise.
Okay, well,
Secondly, a representation has been made that our application was denied. And if that's the case, then I'd like to see the document denying it, because at the moment, that's just hearsay. And in the next breath, it wasn't really denied, but it was kind of kicked to the state. Now, the person who lived all of this is Mr. Bruce, and he could talk about that, but we understand that we need those approvals. So what are we going to do with this testimony tonight about whether it's congregate living or not congregate living?
Well, Mr. King, let me first, please. You've done the same exact thing in bringing Mr. Bruce to testify that you can and will get a septic design done and that these are the dimensions necessary to do that. So I think it is fair for Mr. Mirsky to discuss that as well.
Mr. Unsworth, I can't disagree with that logically, but I just need to say that I had to have Mr. Bruce explain the site plan, including the septic. So, but that's why. But I understand I would have just as well said, we have a septic that is subject to approval by the county. And if I could have got away with that, that's what I would have done. But he had to describe what was there. But I'm just, It's fine. You're the chairman, and if you want to hear the testimony, you're entitled to hear it. So it's all yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wen, unless you have something to add, we'll go back to Mr. Mursky.
Nothing further. Thank you.
I'll continue on, and I'll try to be brief on this this scenario. But essentially, there is a denial that we have seen. We'll somehow get that to you through whatever channels that has to go through. It does exist in the paperwork that we did over from the county health department. And basically, with that denial, there is the right to go up to the DEP to seek their approval. So hopefully that clarifies the situation. So what we have right now is a septic system that has been designed for 1,965 gallons. That's based upon 130 gallons per day and 15 gallons for a single employee on an 8-hour shift. The code basically says that a congregate living motel has 130 gallons, my correction, I'm sorry. It's either 50 gallons per person or 130 gallons per room. So essentially, in order to use Mr. Bruce's calculations, the rooms, if it was classified as a motel, could not exceed two people. And by the time you went to your third person in the motel room, you'll be at 150 gallons per room. You have exceeded the 2,000 gallon threshold. Everything has to go up to the DEP. If you classify this as a hotel, this has to go to the DEP. And of course, we might personally feel that this is actually a residential unit, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And if it's a residential unit, you're well over the 2,000 gallon threshold. You do have to go to the DEP for an approval. Under today's standards, there's different ways that we can size disposal fields. About the best you're going to get is 1 square foot per gallon. Being that these units have kitchens, being that they have washing facilities potentially, they are apartments. They are 350 gallons per unit. Your real flow is about 5,250 gallons. That's assuming that there's no laundry facilities that are being done external to the units, because that's included in the 350. If there's external laundry units, that would go on top of that. Be it standalone washing machines or just common areas that multiple washing machines, it would go up quite substantially. That size of septic system cannot fit on this property under any circumstances. You've got 2 classes of things that you're looking at. One is quality of sewage, one is quantity of sewage. By the 5,250 gallons that this unit will eventually be subject to as a flow rating by the DEP, you'll need a septic system that's about 2.5 times larger than what is shown on there. Currently, that physically cannot fit. If you go with well, I mean, there's many other things. I'll try to get this a little bit done more rapidly. The septic system as proposed right now requires a waiver of distance from the building as proposed, both new and old. Septic systems must be set 10 feet off of property lines. They must be 15 feet from slabs, which elevated buildings such as this would be subject to. They must be 50 feet away from the neighboring septic system. We do not meet the 50 feet from the neighboring septic system. That is a huge impediment upon that property owner, because any operation of this system will affect the performance of that gentleman or ma'am's system. It will probably cause a malfunction of that system given enough time, and then that person will not be able to replace their system very likely, because they won't have the 50-foot separation from the new septic system servicing this building. The elevations that Mr. Bruce is showing for the wall surrounding the septic system, which is roughly 4 feet, most likely will not fly. This property is located in a flood hazard. To get above the flood elevation, you might be looking something more on the order of 7 to 8 feet high on this wall for that septic system. And again, there is a distance from the property and everything else. If you can imagine that you are a neighbor behind this septic system, it will be subject to plant operators coming most likely on a daily basis. They will be subject to odors that will be uncontrollable despite all the technology that we have as they open the lids and add chemicals and do their daily situation routine that has to be done to this. So that backyard where the septic system is proposed to go is going to be a flurry of activity related to sewage pretty much all day long. Should there be a torrential rainfall of any kind, and you have this raised up system within these retaining walls, that flow off of there. It's not impervious surface like you would think it would be. There is stuff underneath it that will slow it down, including the effluent itself. I anticipate, look, what I'm looking at right now will cause major drainage issues under a rain event. Septic systems, keep in mind that they do degrade. They are not forever. They are consumable. And what will happen is that over a period of time, maybe not initially, that septic system will reach a point where it's going to have to be repaired, replaced, and quite a messy job. Again, really hurting those folks that are on the east side as they have to watch, see this, smell this, and watch all the activity that will go on. And my office, by the way, also it does license the sewage plant operator functions, not my personally profession, but my partner, and it's not a fun job to watch or be subject to on a regular basis. I would like to really point out, more than anything else, a letter from the DEP. Mr. White, could you show that by any chance? It did come in when I did my Oprah request to the county health department and saw the recommendation, or at least the implication that it should go up to the DEP. I did write an email to the DEP saying nothing more than, and I'll read this, unless it's probably there for everybody, but is there any way to check to see if a treatment works approval application has been submitted for this property? That would be the method that we would submit septic system designs to the DEP. I gave them a lot in block and just said, have you heard anything about this, or can you tell me anything? The reply that came back from the DEP, we have not received an application for the subject facility. It should be noted that the department has had conversations with the Cape May County Health Department. Based upon that information, the department has concerning the
Mr. Chairman, I have to object. This is the worst kind of hearsay. Am I going to get to question this gentleman from the DEP who apparently is saying things?
What?
This document is being submitted for the information that apparently came from a gentleman whose name I can't see because I can't move the screen. But if it goes up a little bit.
Mr. King, we'll let you have Mr. Bruce comment on this. I'm sure he's hearing all this, and we'll have some.
Mr. Chairman, I have no objection to Mr. Mirsky giving testimony because he's here and we can ask him questions. I cannot question Brian Sage. And apparently his information is now Brian Sage's statements are being read into the record. And he's not here. So unless he's coming, he shouldn't get to testify, which is what's happening.
Understood. Mr. Mirsky, if you just want to refer to the information you've received.
And I apologize for that. So essentially, I'll represent that I spoke to folks at the DEP. The DEP was aware of the project, and they implied that each of these units are going to be rated at 350 gallons per day.
Mr. Unsworth, that's the same thing. He's telling you that someone.
I understand, Mr. King.
In my professional opinion, if these units have kitchens, if these units have laundry facilities, they will be rated as residential dwelling units at 350 gallons per day. They will be classified as a dwelling unit under the septic rules, which I am very familiar with, and I'll represent that on my own.
Okay, so as far as the septic goes, I understand Mr. Mirsky's testimony is that he does not believe the design as proposed is acceptable. Mr. Bruce has testified that he believes he's designed a suitable system, and the health department regulations are not part of this board's responsibility. And if the applicant is unable to get their septic design, that is going to thwart this application. Even if it were approved in front of this board, they would not be able to build it if they can't get their septic approval. And they will be subject to other approvals as well that are not part of this board. So with that said, we've heard the septic design from Mr. Bruce. We've heard Mr. Mirsky's critique of it. And Mr. Wendt, why don't we move on from the septic system at this point?
Yes, your opinion, Mr. Mirsky, based on your experience and all of the various resources you utilize, whether it's contacting the DEP, looking at the regulations, your experience, practically speaking, what's likely to happen with this system?
In terms of regulatory or actual performance?
Actual on the ground.
Actual on the ground is that if the septic system as proposed will not function for any long period of time, if at all, there will be overflows, there will be problems with it, there will be sewage on the ground. You will also have the day-to-day activities. As I say, most likely there will be a daily sewer plant requirement, sewer plant operator, excuse me, requirement to service this system. So there will be people adding chemicals to the system on a daily basis. It'll be a flurry of activity. Typically, a sewer plant operator will spend somewhere between 2 and 3 hours a day with a system of this type, maintaining it.
I'd like to ask you a couple of standard questions I ask all of my experts. Are your observations and methodology today based upon accepted principles in the field of professional engineering, specifically with respect to septic systems?
Absolutely, yes.
And are your conclusions within a reasonable degree of certainty in the field of professional engineering with specializing in septic systems?
Yes.
Members of the board, just in closing with respect to Mr. Mirsky's testimony, and I appreciate why we abbreviated it. As much as there is the requirement of other governmental approvals, I think it's important for the zoning board to know practically what is going to happen. And DEP might approve anything, but when, pardon the pun, it hits the fan, DEP is not going to be the first one down there to deal with it. It's going to be the locals. So it's important for everyone to know at the local level, practically speaking and realistically, what is going to happen with the system. That's the purpose of the testimony. Thank you very much, Mr. Mirsky. Unless there are questions from the board, that concludes Mr. Mirsky's testimony.
All right, let me run down our list real quick here, see if any of our board members care to question Mr. Mirsky. Sherry?
This is Experian right now.
No, I have no questions at the moment.
Rich?
No, I don't have any questions.
Karen?
No, right now.
Lynn?
No, I don't have any questions.
Chris?
No, thank you.
Andy?
Yes, Mr. Mirsky, have you had an opportunity to go on either Sumner or Sherman Avenue to see if the existing septic systems are functioning properly on those streets?
I did several years ago, not recently. There is a history in the OPA request of malfunctions on the existing septic system that was part of the package that was sent to me.
How about other residents in the neighborhood?
In terms of having issues?
Yes.
Directly, we have probably done, out of my company, 5 or 6 replacement systems within Strathmere. I'm not aware of any individual property that is having an issue right now, but nor am I aware that any individual property has a septic system that is truly substandard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Unsworth?
Thank you, Andy. Yes, I've got one more board member. Let me check here.
I
Mr.
apologize,
Truly?
sir.
I'm okay, Matt.
All right, Mr. King, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to save my questions till all of this case was in, but I did want to ask Mr. Mirsky 1 or 2 questions if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Mirsky, when were you first engaged to review this site?
3 months ago.
Have you done any prior work on this site?
I met with the owner of this site 3 or 4 years ago for roughly 30 minutes. At the time, he was talking to me, and I'm trying to visualize it now, but he was basically mentioning that he wanted to enlarge the motel, and I had told him that it would probably not be feasible.
Were you given a copy of what they intended to build?
Bill?
Yeah, did you see what it was they intended to construct?
No, this was a very generic conversation.
It was just one quick conversation.
The conversation of what potentially could be done with the unit if it was to be rebuilt or enlarged.
So you've actually worked on this project before?
No.
Or was it just a fleeting conversation?
Well, I haven't had any work, any invoicing, any compensation. There was a meeting as a courtesy to the owner several years ago. about
So
the
you
project.
actually, in a professional capacity, consulted with my client about this project, and now you're here testifying against the project.
Like, when I met with your client, what I left with was, you cannot get away with this, you will not be able to do this, you will not be able to get it approved.
Do you have a writing to that effect?
No, I don't believe that I did, honestly.
Okay, so this meeting, you didn't review any plans.
No.
Okay, Mr. McLeese, if you could bring up that email, if you would, please.
In order for him to bring up the email, Ray, you're going to have to release your presenting, and so I can throw it over to Bill.
Rich, I think I need you to send it to me. I don't know that I have that.
Yeah, my screen's turned off.
Okay, I got it. You should get it now, Bill.
I did send it to you.
Never mind, I have it. I just need to be able to share.
Paul Dietrich, you're muted right now.
You see my screen, Rich?
Yes, but I thought I'd like to start with the email, not the attachment.
Yeah, I think this is the attachment that I had.
Okay.
I don't know that you sent me an email.
No, that's it. You got the email right there. That's you, isn't it? But you just blocked it. Where'd you go? Go back to that email. Thank you. Are you Sandy Septic?
Yes, I am.
Sandy@septic.com?
Mm-hmm.
And here is an email from actually my client's attorney. So this was actually an attorney-client conversation between his attorney, you, and my client, where he sent you the plans and he says, here is the EDA concept plan. You had no recollection of that though, did you?
I actually don't have a recollection of it, no.
Right. And then the actual plans are there, are they not? If Mr. McLeese, if you can open those up, the plans that he sent you for a 15-unit hotel. You see that? You had no recollection of that either, did you?
No, sir.
So when my client testifies later that his recollection is that you told him as long as he doesn't do 16 and does 15, he should have no problem, it's very likely that his recollection about that is better than your recollection, isn't it?
His recollection may be better than mine, but I certainly would not have told him to do 16 units or 15 units.
Well, I'm certainly now you wouldn't. Now we know who's paying you, but then that's exactly what you said, but we'll get to that later. All right, thank you.
All right,
let's move on here. Mr. Wendt, do you have additional witnesses to call?
Nothing further at this time, reserving rights. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a closing statement when the time permits.
Sure, we will come back to both the applicant and you for closing statements. Shelley Lee, we have a list of individuals from the public that want to speak. Is our plan to go down that list, or Paul, are you handling that?
Yeah, I think Shelley and I both have the list, so if Shelley wants to call.
I do have the list.
Okay, give me 1 second here. So everyone in the public who has been waiting very patiently to be heard, we have a list of everyone that has asked to be heard tonight, and we are going to go down that list in the order that Shelley and Paul have received it. We will continue to take testimony until 10:30, at which time we'll see how we're moving along, and we'll discuss if there's going to be the need for an additional meeting, when that would happen, and where to go from there. So at this point, we will continue with the public portion. We are still considering this anyone within, actually, Shelley, do you have it broken down 200 foot and outside 200? Okay,
It's
so this will
broken
be
down.
inside 200 feet.
Yep, the first.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Unsworth?
Okay, yes, Mr. King.
Is Mr. Hawk leaving the building? Because we were going to hear from him about the volume of the blobs, and I had some questions for him, but I have no objection to going to the public for a while. I don't want to hog up the whole night. So
Let me ask Mr.
I will
Wentz,
do
is that something we're prepared to discuss now, or we can come back to it?
I don't have an answer, so I guess the answer is no, we're not ready, at least with respect to the
Well, there's
overlay.
Mr. Hawk. So, Mr. Hawk, are you prepared to discuss that at this point, or should we come back to it?
It'd probably be best to come back to it.
Okay, then at this point, we will continue on to our list of individuals from the public that would like to speak. Paul or Shelley, please call our first individual.
Okay, Candy Cruz, Candy Cruz?
Yes, I'm here.
Andy Cruz. Okay, do we need them? There she is. Okay. Hi, Candy. How are you? Please state your name and address for the record.
Candy Cruz, 17 East Sherman Avenue in Strathmere, New Jersey.
Thank you. Raise your right hand. Yeah. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Please proceed. Paul, and I'm sorry, Paul Dietrich, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, everybody's been really great. So just as Shelley calls your names, go ahead and share your camera and stuff like that. But other members of the public, please keep, don't share your webcams until Shelley calls you. That way the board can focus on and know who they're speaking, who's speaking to them. So it just makes a better presentation. And I really appreciate everybody's this. So Bill Dager, can you turn off your webcam, please? Thank you.
Great. Okay, Candy, please proceed. Thank you for your patience.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. First of all, just so you know, I did take a look at the revised plans, and it doesn't alter my opinion at all as far as my objection to the future of the property. I live just 4 doors down and within 200 feet of the property in question. My family is among the few remaining families in Strathmere who have enjoyed our town spanning 5 generations. Quite a bit has changed over time. My mom first came to Strathmere with her parents on a train from Philadelphia when she was about 11 years old, more than 80 years ago. In the 1930s, there were more empty lots than houses. My earliest memories are from the 1960s. I do remember clearly that there was a lot of open space, a lot of places for us to play. Growing up, our best buddies lived next door, and actually they still do. Then more houses came, but so did more friends, more community family for all of us, so that was okay. Change was good. Eventually, storms came through Strathmere, and many families needed to raise their homes to be safe. And that was okay too. Everyone should feel that their home is safe. Sometime later, enormous houses began popping up all around town. With each one, a little piece of what some call our view disappeared. But that's okay. I can still walk to the beach or the docks if I feel the need for a view. Along with those enormous houses came a lot of lights. They've impaired our wonderful starry skies, but that's okay too, because I can ask my friends and neighbors to curb their enthusiasm for lighting, or at least turn it down a notch, so that we can all enjoy stargazing. That's what friends and neighbors do for each other. But now, someone wants me to live in the shadows. This proposal means no sun in the afternoon, no sunset sky from our back porch, no privacy at all. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I won't see the sky at all to the west, whether day or night. My mom would likely never open the windows or blinds on the west side of the house for fear of some stranger looking in at us. None of this is okay. It's not what my mom and her parents envisioned when they first visited and fell in love with Strathmere. And it's certainly not something that I ever thought would happen when I made Strathmere my permanent residence 25 years ago, hoping to one day enjoy my retirement in peace and quiet. A lot has changed over time, but enough is enough. Recently, members of our community worked hard with township officials and other professionals to prepare a zoning ordinance that would prevent future overdevelopment. There was a lot of compromising, but most of us breathed a collective sigh of relief, thinking that it will be okay now. But already you are asked to make exceptions, and what outrageous exceptions they are. To emphasize how dreadful this would be, you only need to look down Sherman Avenue The 5 houses directly behind the proposed hotel are exactly as they were when they were built, modest and unpretentious. This proposed hotel does not even closely resemble the character of the street, nor in fact the rest of the town. It would be sorely out of place. This is heartbreaking. I hope that you take my words to heart as they were heartfelt coming from me. I love my home. I'm asking you, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm asking you to please help keep my home an enjoyable, safe haven. Please vote down this proposal. Nothing about it is okay. So much has been taken away already. Please don't take away the sky. Thank you again for listening. I appreciate your time. I'm very sorry. I'm very emotional today.
Candy, thank you for your testimony. Can we have our next individual, please?
Yes, the next one is Sean Montgomery.
Sean Montgomery. And Shelley, who will be after Sean?
Betty Ann Coombs.
Okay, Betty Ann, you're on deck. Sean, name and address for the record, please.
It's Sean Montgomery, 2 East Sherman Avenue, Strathmere.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
Great. Sean, go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Mr. Dietrich, I appreciate your help with this in presenting these slides. Before I get into what I had intended to speak to initially, I do want to share a comment as it relates to the changes in the plan from the applicant. With all due respect to Mr. Barnes, I don't have an attorney that the applicant's attorney could call and let them know that there was a change. I don't participate in the Strathmere Improvement Association, who I believe a member of the township reached out to let them know that there was a change. I don't log into the township's website daily to see if the applicant has submitted changes. Mr. Wendt didn't even receive the township planner's revised report until actually when this meeting started. So I wanted to share that. Also, Mr. King mentioned that the building was changed so that it was moved 7 feet further away from the Coles house, the Coles being neighbors of ours. In fact, that move brought it closer to my home. So to satisfy one neighbor at the cost of another, I don't believe accomplishes what the neighbors collectively are looking for. I just live across the street from the applicant's property. Notification, I believe there should have been proper notification in order for us to, or for myself, to feel better prepared for having conversations today. I did find out through word of mouth, but I wish I had more time to have prepared for this. I have documents that are basically based on what the original plan was. So, Mr. Dietrich, if you could go to the next slide, please. So there's been conversation about changes that have been made to the zoning requirements and discussions about the master plan. And one of the drivers to the work that happened, the 2 years of effort, the 2 years of negotiation, was the height of houses that were being built in the town. And these are some of those homes that were drivers behind the need for and the passage of these new variance requirements. Mr. Dietrich, if you could go to the next slide. Those houses are the houses, I'm sorry if you could go back one, thank you. That list of houses is the list of houses that the applicant used to provide a sense of comfort that this hotel would not be the only house or the only structure of this kind of height. And it just strikes me as odd that the drivers behind the need to change the variance to change the zoning requirements are now being used as reasons why it would be okay to offer variances to the new zoning requirements. And that's just a perception that I wanted to share with folks if I could. If you could go to the next slide, please. This was already spoken to earlier, so I can just skip over that. If you could go to the next slide, please. Back one, please. Mr. King had referenced that the changes that were made by the applicant address the concerns or issues that have been presented. I just want folks to keep in mind that only one neighbor at that point had presented, and even at that point, the professionals hadn't presented yet. So to say that the concerns of the neighbors are being addressed, I think is getting a little bit too ahead of things. Mr. Hawk shared this slide previously. I included here just to remind the board that changes in the building design are overall insignificant, and they don't change the impact this monstrosity has on our village. For my own clarification, Steve, I wasn't sure, are the buildings more than 2 inhabitable stories, regardless of height, allowed under the zoning laws? And Steve, you don't need to answer that at this time, but I question whether or not the height of the building by itself matters when I believe the laws require that you can't have more than 2 habitable floors. So Candy shared with us, or Ms. Cruz shared with us, her sentiments about the changes that have been going on. For almost 2 years, work was done with members of the township and members of Strathmere to try and clarify the new zoning requirements and to create the new master plan. And these were created specifically for Strathmere. And those changes should result in no longer having a need to approve variances. And yet here we are less than 7 months after those zoning laws were approved, back to where we were again. I don't understand what the point if these laws are put in place, but then just subject to negotiation. They're a result of 2 years of negotiation. That's what's happening here. The residents of Strathmere, if I may speak for them, are not here to negotiate. We're here to ensure that the laws that we all worked on to come together and agree on are being enforced. If you could go to the next slide. Again, please, one more. And one more. So this is where I'm going to pick up with where I had intended to speak to before the changes were submitted by the applicant. So every town develops a personality over time, and oftentimes that personality develops unintentionally. Over the last 3 or 2 meetings, the reference has been to the term character. I'm using the word personality. I think you can use them interchangeably. I've been coming down to the different shore points for 35 years now. And I've stayed in almost all of the different towns that are in the area or vicinity of Strathmere. I'm personally familiar with the personalities of each of these towns. If you go online and you do a search to find information about each of the different towns in the area, there's a pattern that comes up. There are keywords that you begin to find repeat from one website to the next or one article to the next. And those keywords effectively describe each town's personality. Next slide, please. And this is what you'll find. If you look into information about Avalon, you'll regularly see these words: posh, wealthy. Stone Harbor, reference to McMansions. Sea Isle City is a college town or a party town. Ocean City, you'll always hear dry. It's treeless and it's very family oriented. Margate, you'll see that it's always referenced as being kind of an old school point. Now, if, I'm sorry, hold on one second. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share with you the key words that you'll find if you do research on Strathmere. And those words describe its personality. And it's important to keep in mind that that personality is deliberate. It's not unintended, and it's rare and precious and deserving of Upper Township's protection. To that end, the community spent 2 years Again, negotiating, trying to come to terms and agree on what do we want to have in place to protect that personality. And the result is a master plan, not for Upper Township, but specifically named for Strathmere. And the zoning law is put in place to put teeth behind that plan. So the following slides also include the overlay of the two proposed structures on the formal motel. I've attempted, these are the same slides that were used earlier, so I'll share one point about them, but I'm not an architect, so I can't speak to proportions specifically. I also left the slides that were from before on there, the images from before the new application was submitted. If you could go to the next slide, please. So when I look at this structure, this box, I ask myself, does this gigantic structure reflect the personality of being quaint? And quaint is one of those keywords that you'll find when you do a search on Strathmere. It does not. I'd like to speak to Mr. King's comment regarding the volume of the cubes. And as I said, I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. I just live across the street. I don't look at homes or buildings and think about their volume. I see the size and the bulk. I'll ask you to consider this as a point of reference. If you put in front of me a wheel of Parmesan cheese that's 1 foot in diameter and 6 inches high, and then put next to that a wheel of Swiss cheese that is 3 feet in diameter and 12 inches high, please don't share with me that, well, the volume is very comparable, and therefore the outer surface really isn't something to be considered. Personally, I don't think I could eat either wheel within one sitting, but I believe I could eat the Parmesan before I could eat the Swiss cheese. So, and I think that's important just in terms of the discussion. This isn't about volume. This is about what this does to our town, our village. And this certainly does not fit with the keyword of quaint. The next slide, please. Same thing. You'll find cottages regularly referred to online when they describe this town. This monstrosity that sits behind these quaint cottages is a complete contradiction to the personality of the entire town, let alone the immediate area around where the proposed structure is to be. These cottages, the personality, they're what people call their homes. These are homes for folks. And you've got this monstrosity sitting right behind them. Again, very contradictory to the personality of this town. If you could go to the next slide, please. Another term that you'll hear is privacy. And listening to Candy's comment, I believe her home is one of those that sits right up against that dark wall. There is no privacy for any of the homes on that eastern side of Commonwealth between Sumner and Sherman. If you could go to the next slide, please. Strathmere is a village. It's not a city. It doesn't even meet the legal definition that's assigned to a town. This imposing structure befits a city. It does not befit Strathmere. I think it's also important that I talk about the impact, the personal impact on my life and on my family. I purchased my house, which is right across the street from, if you look at the big box across the street to the left, that's my home. Purchased it over 20 years ago. And I purchased it because of the personality that this town has. It's that personality that brings 4 generations of my family together every weekend in the summer and throughout the winter. If we could go to the next slide. The other way, please. We can skip over this. It's been discussed. We can skip over this. This is a view from the front porch of my home. My family sits on this deck with a view of a modest two-story former hotel or motel, and this is what awaits us. The next slide, please. During the day, this is what we see. We see this hotel or this motel every day. We are also able to see beyond it. And with the proposed structure, we will not be seeing beyond anything. And while zoning laws aren't really focused on how much sky you can see, they certainly are focused on whether or not it's good for the community, the proposed changes, and if a variance is to be given, is it good for the community? And I do not believe so, again, from my own family, my own personal perspective here. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is what awaits me at night. Every evening, this is what sits in front of me. The next slide, please. This is what my neighbors across Commonwealth will be seeing during the day. What you can see what's there today versus what is proposed. And I apologize, the image at the bottom of the new structure, I didn't have time to update everything. It shows 6 pods when there are 5, but keep in mind that the width of this has only moved 5% and the height has come down 12%. So if you could go to the next slide, please. And this is what awaits my neighbors at night. I would hate to see our neighborhood become this, especially if this becomes acceptable. I worry about what's down the road for our town. If you could go to the next slide, please. When I purchased our home 20 years ago, I had every expectation that things would change over time. I also had a reasonable expectation that Strathmere's personality would endure. I now have every expectation that township officials will defend what they and a community of thoughtful, committed citizens put in place to protect this town's personality. The next slide, please. The word change has come up many, many times over the last 3 meetings. And I think we all agree change is good. It's inevitable. This entire hearing is about a community that actually supports change. In fact, my neighbors and I are here to fight for change. Change, however, does not mean the building of a new superstructure for a hotel. Tonight, the change we are fighting for is to put an end to the approval of exceptions to the law by the very township that created those laws. Next slide, please. So I ask you, please give strong consideration to the facts that were presented by the professionals before me. I am no expert. Also, please give consideration to what I've shared tonight. And I ask that you please take to heart what you are about to hear from a not so small group of committed citizens of the Township of Upper and the Village of Strathmere. I object to the request for the variances and the plans for this structure, and I ask that you help protect Upper Township's hidden gem. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Shelley, who's our next?
Mr. Unsworth, I just want to correct
Yes, Mr.
one thing
King.
the gentleman said. I'm not going to cross-examine him, and I'm unlikely to cross-examine any of the good citizens. I just wanted to point out to Mr. Montgomery that the building was not shifted towards you. We actually made the building smaller, and that's why there's 7 more feet on the other street, and we did not move it towards you to do that. We just made it smaller. it is still fully compliant with the setback on the street where you are.
Thank you for that clarification. I think I probably got confused because of the variance related to the steps leading up to the great lawn, I think it's been referred to. And I got confused with that. So I apologize. I had in my mind the steps that I think required a variance.
Got it. All right. Mr. Montgomery, thank you. Mr. King, if you would, we've got probably 100 more people to get through here. If you would make a note possibly, and so we're not having to speak to each individual. If you have questions, they all listen patiently to the application without interruption. So let's let them have their say, and you'll absolutely be given an opportunity at the end if you have somebody specific you would like to refer to.
Well, okay, I'm just saying that gentleman, I have no idea if he's going to be here later.
Well,
and
you'll
that was
be
just
given the opportunity to refer to a comment like that, even if they're not here.
however you want to.
I have been here for the better of 12 hours, and I will gladly stay until every question you might have for me, Mr. King, is answered.
Thank
You do
Mr.
not have to stay in that.
Okay, and our next individual is Betty Coombs, is that correct?
Yes.
Hi, Betty, name and address for the record, please.
My name is Betty Coombs. The address is 6 East Sumner Avenue in Strathmere, New Jersey. I apologize for the voice. I'm a post-COVID person, so I'm here. I'm grateful.
Hopefully you're feeling better now.
I feel great. I feel
Good.
great.
Will you raise your right hand for me, please? You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth.
Absolutely.
All right, please proceed.
The Upper Township Zoning Board, thank you for taking the time to listen to your township neighbors regarding the matter of the proposed inn. I am Betty. My husband Jim and I live directly to the proposed, next door, to the proposed hotel. We've owned our home since 2008 and are the closest possible neighbors to the backside of this proposed development. This gets emotional when I hear the opposing side say they have sacrificed size. What are you asking me to sacrifice? Being the neighbor to this project. A visual has been given to Mr. Dietrich showing the proximity of our home to the proposed septic patio area. We oppose this project, and both Jim and I agree with the opposing arguments that you will hear tonight. Not only our opposition to this daunting development, but saddened by the possibility it could become a tragic reality that threatens to destroy not only the portion of land that we as humans see, but have heard tonight, the fragile underneath, which I'll call the underbelly of Strathmere. Jim and I are farmers, 9th generation farmers. Jim is a steward of the land, and he more than anyone else knows, once you destroy the land, you will never get it back. If the land that we see, or the underbelly of the fragile system, will only deteriorate if it's not cared for properly. I'll go through and just share safety concerns, which are very real for our neighbors and us. The volume of people that could possibly congregate from the structure on the decks, in the open kitchen, in the open fireplace on the 4th floor is daunting. If the community equipped to handle the height of such a structure, what happens in an emergency? Strathmere is a great place for children. They've always played on side streets. And as traffic congestion grows, what will it be like on Sherman and Sumner when cars are entering and exiting frequently? Trying to cross Commonwealth is already hard enough with all the visual obstacles that are there. The cars, the trucks, the boats with trailers, and the toys that people bring down when they come on vacation behind their trailers. This structure is only going to add to the danger and the congestion. And then there's the parking lot. Of course, it means more water runoff. A daily dousing from a sprinkler system adds more water to an area that already has drainage problems. Where's that water going to go when the ground is already saturated? Does our property have to absorb that also? Where are the people going to park when they bring all their water vehicles? We already deal with boats in the parking lot behind us, in the current motel. We deal with the water tools that come down, and it's not just one vehicle, I can assure you, per group that stays there. And next, of course, is the infamous septic conversation. The proposed septic field runs the entire length of our property. It appears to be within 5 feet of our property. I could be mistaken on that. With an enormous wall as high as our first floor windows. Mr. Dietrich has pictures of tape that I've put up to show where people can sit on that patio area and look in our windows. The plans say there will be a patio high atop the septic mound. Hotel guests will be just a few feet from our bedrooms, our living rooms, and our decks at all times of the day and night. The noise already tunnels into our home from the current lawn and patio area. This is where people now living in the former motel gather. Conversation area, playground, and even I say this year it's become a camping area where people spend the night outside. And it's also a karaoke stage. At any time of the given day and night, we hear the most personal conversations. So we can hear supper menus, we hear ball game scores, we hear laughter coming from the showers. And it's not even after happy hour has started. The new family patio space will be just a few feet from our entryways, our windows, and our living space. Yes, guests will be encouraged to gather in this patio area. We'll have the noise, the lights, the odors from the septic patio area. We get to smell the cooking and the septic tank obviously being pumped on a regular basis. Our quiet private life will be gone, and the year-round facility will be just detrimental to the quality of life that Strathmere can sustain. I am learning that the fragile piece of land can be saved by you all being proactive, by reviewing the master plan, by following it, and eliminating variances like this in the future. And now to the fragile septic area. Ours is one of those old systems, and we have cared for it diligently to make it last. We do well our inside amenities to help preserve our system. Our visual has been on the surface and its impact on our home. Mr. Mursky sees, understands the inside, or again, the underbelly working of the system. Knowledge gives power. His shared knowledge regarding what I call the underbelly of Strathmere shows the delicate land you're working with. Once again, we're farmers. Once you destroy the land, there's no recourse, whether on top or whether under the surface. I hope this design board will grasp the wealth of information that he is sharing. I urge you to allow this knowledge to give you the power to be stewards of this fragile community and save it from negative reactions that can come about from not being proactive. It's difficult to imagine that the project could be approved with the knowledge that it can damage other people's properties. Again, sacrifice. Who's doing the sacrificing here? Just because you want to downsize? You think that we all need to sacrifice? Regardless of its size, damage is still in the forefront. Air circulation will be constricted due to the structure, and of course, our view will be eliminated. We will now live in a dark cloud. We've recovered from health and family issues in this little town. The proposed hotel complex will completely erase Strathmore's quiet solitude and forever endanger our safety, our property, and our neighborhoods. As I look at the plans for the structure, I can see it blocking the afternoon sun, which will encourage more algae and mildew growth on the west side of our home, blocking the air circulation, increased concerns for safety, congestion, the smell from the garbage, the septic, and the loss of privacy, and of course, the beautiful end of day sunsets. Again, once these things are taken, we will never get them back. Thank you for your attention. We trust that you will protect the delicate community by upholding your zoning laws that you and your colleagues have worked so hard to protect this community. We oppose this project with all of our hearts. Thank you for listening.
Betty, thank you for your comments. It is now 10:25. I think we should probably discuss as a board what we have coming up agenda-wise, when our next meeting would be. Obviously, this will be continued. Shelley, what do we have coming up on our calendar or on our schedule for applications?
I did get, whatever we have next will probably not be heard until after this meeting.
Okay, so our next scheduled meeting is January 14th, correct?
Correct.
And we just discussed starting our meeting times at 6:30, so that would apply for this January meeting. And one wrench to throw in here, I may have a conflict on the 14th. I don't know whether there are other options for a January meeting that we could still make any noticing requirements and things. And I won't know that for another week or so. At this point, I guess we just stick with our regular meeting date of the 14th at 6:30. This application will be continued at that time. Shelley or Paul, jump in if I'm saying something incorrect here.
No, that's correct. I mean, I did get a couple of applications in today, but they still have to be workshopped, so we can hold them off until after this application is done. And we would have to notice at least 10 days before the next meeting. So if you couldn't make it, we would have to know as soon as possible so we could change the meeting date.
Okay, so for right now, the next meeting on this application will be January 14th at 6:30. We will continue with the public portion, and we've still got, Shelley, 100 people or 90 some people that still want to speak. Is that correct?
Yes, because we've only done 3 and we have on the list 117.
Okay.
So we have
Might I
100.
add a suggestion then? Since we'll be hearing this till June of 2022, why stop now?
Because we've been at it for 3.5 hours already, Larry. And
okay.
And if we were going to finish tonight in the next 20 minutes, absolutely. But no, this is going to continue for a while, and everybody needs to be heard, and we will make sure we do that. So this is your announcement, everybody. Next meeting, January 14th, and 6:30 will be the time of the meeting. All right. With that said, I see a Paul Turnbull tumble down here waving. Okay, I guess he's gone. Okay, I guess unless there's other business.
We had
Yes,
Bill.
Matt, can I interject something?
Sure.
I had a very hard time hearing Mrs. Coombs. And I know that she said she was a little bit hoarse, but it was also that it was very muffled.
Karen,
all
Karen,
right.
it was her microphone and how she was interacting with her camera.
Okay, well,
her-
I guess
and her-
what I'm trying to say to you, Matt, is I think it, when we hear that coming from someone who's giving testimony, I think we should stop and see if they can get it less muffled.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, it was muffled, but I could understand what she was saying. So please chime in if you're not hearing it properly, Karen, absolutely chime in, okay?
Yeah, I would like to hear every sentence that people have to say. And if the person that's speaking doesn't realize that it's muffled to us. So I think it's important that the chairman, if we hear it muffled, let's get them to stop and get their microphone working properly for us.
And I will go again. Maybe I'll be better next month so I can go again. I'll gladly repeat it.
Thank you very much, Betty. We appreciate you coming tonight.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, with that said, any other business for the board tonight? No further business tonight? Yep.
Sorry. No, we've done the bills resolutions. We're good.
Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Larry, second Andy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, good night, everybody. Thank you. And the public who's still listening, thank you for your patience.
Happy
Good night, all.
Good night. Happy holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy Christmas, Happy New Year.